good asset in the city for moving forward. And of course, one of the major steps following the adoption of the general plan is updating any ordinances to be in alignment with the direction the general plan is giving. Good asset in the city for moving forward. And of course, one of the major steps following the
Good question. Oops. Whoa. Hey, not a question about this plan, but just how this meeting's going to work. I was kind of under the impression of like dig in, form an opinion. And so like I have pages and pages of items. The mayor over here has got no less than 200 items. So I almost just wonder, how do we even process through this? Like we can sit here and bring up random questions to you for the next hour and 40 minutes and we can be vaguely nothing done. Like how does the rubber hit the road?
So I think tonight may be helpful for you guys to ask questions. As you've been reviewing, ask as many questions as you can, and then, have more meetings if you need to. That's what's happening with the county. The Planning Commission decided they wanted to slow the plan down, the process down, and they're going to be reviewing the draft county plan over at least 3 more meetings. So take your time. We're not trying to rush you. And, we don't have to be present for every meeting, but we're here tonight. So we want to, answer any questions that you have.
And I guess I'm not only just asking you, but I'm just asking us as a group, like, how do we handle the volume? Like, is it mayor's turn and then it's Justin's turn? Like, how do we get through it all? Because I'm sure everybody has so much discussion to handle.
Yeah, there's probably 10 ideas on how best to handle it, to your point, but I do think we can be thoughtful about it. Maybe one person kicks off with some of the things with your list, and then others might have things related to that topic. Let's flesh that out, and then move to the next person for the next topic and try to get through these.
One thing is the future land use plan is kind of the base of the plan because everything ties. This is what at some point Morgan City could look like. That's the vision. So this is a good spot. I would almost suggest that, maybe some of these core elements like the future land use or transportation map, the most important items are in a map typically. There are goals and visions as well. And so it'd almost be nice if while we're on a topic, everybody say, oh, I have comments or questions on that. And so we debate the core topics as we work through it. And rather than just shotgunning each person's items, maybe debate the big ones.
I have a question or comment. I think all of this depends on demographics, I think, right? The future growth. And as I looked through this, I was kind of surprised by the small amount of growth.
Mm-hmm.
I noticed from 1980 to 2020 that we grew by 2,175 people. And in the next 20 years, we're planning on growing only about 1,000 people. And that to me, I think that's key to this whole plan. If we're only planning on that amount of people,
Mm-hmm.
then we do X. But I think we're going to have a lot more growth than that. I mean,
Yeah.
you look at the 90 condos just going in,
Mhm.
a subdivision that I happen to be in, 40 houses already sold, and we're approving more subdivisions all the time. Are we being ultra conservative on our demographic for the growth?
Yeah, and Lewis Young did the demographic projections for the planning process, and they did tend to take the lower track of estimates, which were based on census data. I believe Wasatch Front had some higher, a little bit higher projections, and so it is very likely that your growth is going to be a lot more than what that plan is showing.
That just struck me very clearly when I saw that. I said, wow.
You're absolutely right. I had the same opinion. And the projections are a lot of times based off the past.
That's right.
And so that's where it's, and based on these big projects in Morgan County that are being proposed, the Wasatch Peaks Resort, and there's other ones, and eyes are on this county. And so I think you're right to recognize it could be quite a bit more.
Yeah, because this says 2020 to 2040, and already in 2022, we've kind of accelerated that considerably compared to the growth that we're expecting. So anyway, I think that's very key to this whole plan. I mean, if we're going to grow by only 1,000 people, then we go to Plan B or Plan A. If we're going to have 4,000 people, then a totally different scenario, right?
Just to call out, a related point, 'cause I think that's smart. But it's not just the organic growth within the community of either people moving in or people having kids. It's what people are coming into the city and using services or recreating and then leaving, but they don't live here. And, or what do some of these projects within the county that are going on, Wasatch Peaks was mentioned, that may bring or may not, are those people gonna come into Morgan City and use services? Or are they gonna go to Ogden to use services? Because that to me is the same answer. It changes what we build for. If we're expecting all these folks coming into the city, then we should have an infrastructure to support that. If not, we might be overbuilding.
So I hope you don't mind. I was on the advisory meeting when we first started, and some of the things, I'll tell you what we were discussing. Some of the things that I've seen since then that I think might be beneficial to change. You guys can just let me know. We talked about, we've changed this greater downtown mixed use area. So in the future, 30 years now, when we don't know, it's changed so much from commercial, from retail to now online, and to now to, we don't know what's happening after COVID. So that could be an area that could potentially have a lot of growth, but also can house commercial if it comes back and it's something vital for the city to bring things in. With the bridge coming in, that's where we talked about maybe having this here instead of housing. Then that way we can expand the city to be a centrally located commercial mixed-use type of area for Morgan County. We're talking county. The other thing, though, that I'm not sure, and we might have slipped through this. This is my personal feeling, is in this mid-density and the low-density residential. If you look at that, how many units, that is increasing quite a bit. And I don't know if you guys want to do that or not. Only reason why I'm saying that is if you do 6 to 15 units per acre in all of this dark yellow here, you're talking townhomes and apartments, which we have mostly residential. And then this one would be as low as 8,000 square feet on up, which we currently don't even allow 8,000 square feet. So that's an area maybe we need to change these numbers and then keep this medium density, take that all the way out and leave it only here. But that's, I want you guys' thoughts on that. What other things was a big thing?
Teresa, one thing on that is this layout, it does kind of, have the core, the highest intensity in the center, and then it radiates out. And so you could take the MDR out, as you mentioned, or you could just change the numbers to match what's an appropriate LDR for Morgan City looking forward, what's an appropriate MDR looking forward, and change those numbers. So you still have this transition of highest intensity in the core, next layer, you're at 3 or 4 layers as you move out to the perimeter.
I totally agree. And I know Mayor Little had that same thing.
Let me give you an example. The rep property is in that area there. Under that proposed situation, you could put 15 units per acre. You could put condominiums and high-rise apartments in there.
Times 11 acres.
Yeah, you give 150 homes on the rep property. Before that went through, we struggled heavily to even get the R12. People wanted R20. So you've got a situation where do we put the numbers to accommodate more housing, because that's the word of the day? Or do we put the numbers in there, what we would like to see our future land look like? To me, that's the question. The rep property is a good example to me. So certainly sat through that and no ramifications to what happened on that one. What we have today that's been established. With this proposal, you could have had high-rise apartments in there.
Well, and I agree that that needs to be addressed. That's my primary concern with the whole plan. I like almost everything in it except the medium density residential area. It's too big, it's too dense, it will ruin the character of the city. I see what it's trying to accomplish, but we have to remember too that density does not automatically equal affordability. Just because there are a ton of apartments there doesn't mean they're going to be cheap. And so I think it's a gamble. I think, like Mayor Little said, we need to be more proactive than reactive. What do we want it to look like? And we don't want it full of apartments and high rises.
The other thing is you look at that, the lighter yellow, that low density one. Terminology talks about having less density as we work towards the county. But on the other hand, that allows 8,000 square foot lots. That's not larger lot sizes. That's smaller than we currently have. So the terminology, the wording in the document talks about it phasing the larger as it goes out, but yet the numbers don't dictate that. If somebody come in and bought that up, and again, that's going to go probably a piece at a time. If a developer had the opportunity to go half-acre lots or 1 acre lots or 8,000 square foot lots, what are they going to do? If legally they can put 8,000 square lots in, we're bound to do what legally the document says.
I just like to echo that as well. When we look at this, there is what can we do and then what should we do? What do we actually want to promote here, right? And I do like on the synopsis page, it talks about the different guiding principles around this. Certainly, you know, everyone can read those. It's on the first or second page there. But the few things that, from my perspective, that always comes up in meetings, you know, is that it's an amazing place. Oregon is an amazing place to raise a family, right? So we do want to have families here, but there's some things that are missing that go along with that, right? We do not have enough commercial and businesses and places to work in the county, right? We all know that. There's the biggest property taxes we're getting are from ourselves and from the big landowners. And, you know, yes, the new developments are going to help out there. But when we have this plan, it needs to promote the things that we want it to have and not just, well, we could do this here. Because if it doesn't fit, then it's not going to be, it won't end up like we want it to be. And yes, as has been stated there, if there's a chance that people can squeeze more money out of acreage, they're going to do it because that's what they're going to do. You know, for me personally, you know, in this here, the downtown area is something that I personally would love to see Morgan develop, you know, a downtown area that is actually a downtown area, right? We have Commercial Street. Commercial Street is historic. It has some businesses in there, but very few, right? And, you know, one of the main things in talking about this, because of course, most of this land is going to be residential. It's what it looks like there, but the commercial and the industrial centers there, it gets into a different part of the plan as in how you execute and track people there. But is it going to look like this in the next 30 years? That exit, for example, the way that we've got that planned out, that's a major one here when it comes to the way this is all laid out and developed. Is that going to be the exit in 2050? We hope not, right? Nobody wants that exit to be there. They want it to be more accessible, easier to get over the railroad tracks, something that can actually allow for people to come in here and move here, right? We know it's a great place to live because we have amazing opportunities and the families and the community is amazing there. We need to focus on the economic engines of the county and the city, what it can be. Anyway, so I'll get off my soapbox on those aspects of it. But the balance between economic development and the residential development need to be harmonious for the growth. I agree that the growth projections are very low. Very low.
Yeah, and I think with the committee, we really talked about what do we do? One of the things just from this group that we did discuss is we have such a large industrial area. And I know that a lot of it is a farm right now, but it's too much. And so what do we do with that? And that was when it came to we want to have the opportunity for people to have economic development, to have businesses in here, to be able to do that, but we don't want to sit there and have it stifled because we don't know what's going to happen in the future. And I think that's why we really talked about the greater downtown mixed use, where really, the zoning is going to govern what we put in there, but it's going to give a lot of flexibility. I hope that, so for me and the committee, we were really like that idea of the greater mixed use. And two, the river-oriented commercial and recreation. East, the Echo River is, Weber River is a benefit, and we don't use it as a benefit. And so we're hoping that in the future, if we get some development there, we can actually have it be recreational, maybe some, fishing area or businesses that are specifically for, that would relate to that, as well as maybe even, some RV parking, et cetera. I think that the density and the residential is something I don't personally like, but the rest of the thing I really like.
A
So,
couple of thoughts then from what I'm hearing is, if I can marry a couple of these concepts that I've heard. Jake talked about using that great big purple area, the greater density or greater downtown mixed use is potentially master planned. So that it doesn't come in as Ray mentioned, piecemeal, parcel by parcel. There's some pretty good chunks in there, and maybe that's the approach to get what we want. I'm unclear why we have highway commercial on one side of the highway, but not on the other. That part's a little confusing to me, but I do like creating greater density of our commercial area in particular, because one of the tenants, I forget the word I'm looking for, but one of the synopses that we wanted for this community was, this walkability downtown. And if we're spreading out our commercial pieces parcel by parcel from here, then we're driving everywhere. And unfortunately, as nice as we've got some of our things, we have a really backwards downtown in the sense that most commercial streets culminate in the train station, and our commercial street is parallel to the train station. So we only get half. Whereas, you look at 25th Street in Ogden, you're heading towards the train station. You have development on both sides. Same thing in Salt Lake, on 300 South. So those are the kinds of things that I think we need, knowing that we have a limitation already in how it's built out. How can we focus and concentrate, this pedestrian encouragement versus spreading it out over 3 or 4 square miles. And now we drive to we drive to get a haircut, then we drive to go get dinner, and then we drive to go to this, and we're not walking anywhere. And to me, that's an important part of this plan.
so in the scope of work that was done, it was a general plan, but the trail system, if I'm right, Lisa, was not really in the forefront or on the scope, was it? Or
Yeah, I mean, there's a rough trail concept, in the Parks and Recreation chapter, but yeah, that definitely needs a finer grain of implementation. And like you're saying, that the highway commercial doesn't appear on the other side because the idea is that this side is more walkable. That's where you want people walking, in the commercial street area and in this newer kind of downtown area, if it's, live work units or townhomes or whatever happens to go in there. You want people walking there in between the river. And also there is the proposed frontage road on this side in this concept to try and, connect up to Stoddard Lane to improve transportation on that side a little. And you could also face commercial, have that be another important commercial street, kind of a continuation of that.
One point on the highway commercial, I mean, it looks like to the map, it's only partially built out. There still is a lot in the red. There's a lot more red there to build out. So if you take it to the other side, then you're adding even a lot more commercial. It looks to be, pretty significant at this point.
And I think our intent is that when the bridge comes across, the city has actually purchased the land, you've seen the commercial street realignment. We're hoping to have where we can have our trail system hook up there, commercial street, hook up with the Mickelson Mile. The city also is looking at having this, which is right by Tractor Supply, be a park. And so that'll also hook up with the Mickelson Mile. So we're trying to do things on this side to have walkability along the river and through the city. It is a challenge on the other side, though. As soon as you get over the highway, we really don't know what we're going to do over there. There's just not a lot of open space, walkability with the highway and old highway roads. So we are trying to get some on there, but we are working on with the county. They got a grant to do a trail system, and we are participating in those negotiations, but it is their plan. But we're planning on that trail system come through the city as well.
Could I, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to mention on the recreation side of things and the trail side of things. So one of the concepts is for the short term, trying to add something within the roadway corridor, whether that's a wider shoulder or if you can fit a bike lane or maybe even a paved trail that's either adjacent to or removed where you have the right of way width, just to try and get that in there short term, and then long term kind of working on these trails along the river and along the creeks to provide those separated networks.
What I wanted to suggest, if we could do this to keep it on topic, and we can stay on trails and parks and rec. We have those 9 guiding principles. If we picked one, so if we stayed on parks and rec and we focus all of our questions on that particular topic until we feel like we've answered those, and if we want to put a 10-minute or 15-minute cap on each of those as we talk through them, that might help us to guide all our thoughts, because there's obviously a lot. But should we stay on trails and parks and recreational areas? Is that, if that's where we are? I don't care where we start.
Yeah, we can answer any more questions on that, wrap that idea up. And there's been discussion throughout the process as well of a water park. And so the idea of, and Teresa, maybe you can go to the recreation plan, the concept. It's towards the end. The map's quite a. Well, as far as the map goes, let's see.
Yeah.
So I like Justin's proposal, and, barring anyone either having a better idea, let's settle on something so that we can move forward. And then as we talk through each of those topical areas, then as far as any actions that come from that, Lisa, I don't know what happens from here. If there's recommendations that are ultimately made that then get redrawn into the plan. But that's kind of what I'm thinking is let's go with Justin's proposal. Spend 10 minutes or so on each one, or get as far as we can get. And if we need more time down the road, we can certainly take the time to do this right. But
Nate, we could extend the work session, I'm sure. I mean, I don't know that there's a deadline that says we have to have this done by 7 tonight.
well, other than we have a planning commission meeting tonight.
No, what I'm saying is, if you only made it through two of the concepts and we still needed 6, because I'm going to suggest there's quite a bit of discussion on land use.
Yeah.
When we get to that one, I doubt we have enough time if you went through all of the others. In other words, we may be holding another work session.
Gotcha.
And
I
maybe
agree.
Approving it in October rather than August, say.
Which is fine. I'm not in a rush to push this through.
Exactly, that's my point.
I'd rather do it right. So if you're comfortable, Lisa, and everyone else that's involved, if you have any opposition, voice it.
I think the topics lead back to the map and the other point that Jake made was the map is oftentimes the ultimate deliverable. My fear is making a recommendation on a map that if I were to just kind of go high level of the map, I could go block by block and there's lots of questions in every single block of why that color there. So maybe we visit the topic that we're on and associate it to the map and then get into a little bit of the nitty gritty of the map, because isn't the map the final deliverable kind of?
Thank you for that, Mayor Gale.
Yeah, I liked what Mayor Little said about we have a certain amount of density that we have in there, and if one of these pops with a developer, could put a lot more housing or such in there, then maybe the residents. I hear a lot from the residents about how they want Morgan to be in the future. So if we have, I don't want to take all your time, but if we have a medium density residential and a low density residential, and we have those areas that are big, real big, is there somewhere in between them two that either we don't call it low or we don't call it medium, but we protect ourselves until, so one of these doesn't pop and we have a lot more than at least the residents that are voicing to me. I've mentioned to them about growth, rooftops, and I've thought and considered it a ton, and it doesn't necessarily mean it creates less taxes. If you have a whole bunch of houses and you have a whole bunch of population, it gets some expenses that an impact fee doesn't carry out very long. So, and that was just my ideas. If we take care of what could happen with the density thing and maybe move that as a higher priority than say the trails or the park, so that we can at least protect ourselves, at least with what I'm hearing from the residents. But
Is there I'm just curious, I don't know the economics of running a city, but is there a better infrastructure than others as far as, should most of your operating income come from, commercial or property taxes, or what's the ideal?
sales tax.
Sales tax. Okay, so we're probably lacking there. Just a hunch.
So we're working in another,
Start with number three. If that, number three is accomplishing the justice goal and your point at the same time. Because number three's principle is smart growth. So it would be both at the same time, right? You should start there instead of the parks.
I'm comfortable with that. We're on parks here. So yeah, we can debate this. Let's just maybe finish this up since we're on the page, and then we can move on.
okay. Just a couple of items just to touch on from the park standpoint, just the concept of maybe a future potential regional park in partnership with the county down by the river, and that could integrate the water park and kind of help deal with some of those issues that you've been facing with that side of the recreation. And then you can see the on-street network is shown in this dashed orange. That's kind of the short term, just get some shoulder, just get something to help all these user groups use the area safely. And then the dashed green lines represent the long-term vision of off-street. And just from the county side of things, there's been a little more resistance there, and particularly from some of the landowners about, there's never going to be a trail segment through my property ever. And you just have to have
We're
the
going to be a
vision.
what? Sorry.
There will never be a trail segment through my
Gotcha.
land, And so you just have to have that vision long-term, like you were talking about the Jordan River Trail. I mean, that took 30 to 40 years to realize. There was a lot of work that happened just chipping away piece by piece. And finally, within the last 5 years, they closed the last gap. So it can happen, and it may be multi-generational, it may be great grandkids that start to see that happen. But, and this is a key piece. You have some of the key elements here in the city. make that happen. So if we don't have any other questions on parks, we can go back to,
So
Lisa, is there a reason, 'cause the city doesn't have any park to the southwest, right? Where there's gonna be quite a bit of growth.
you're talking about this area here?
Yeah, that area. Should there be a dot on them? Not to say a park goes here, but just say, let's get a park in this area, and just make sure at some point, everybody can walk, within a mile or
Yeah.
half mile to a park.
Yeah, absolutely. We can definitely add an additional park in there and make that recommendation.
And it has to be done carefully. So you're saying, we want one in this area, but we're not picking somebody's property. You try to make it blurry.
It's just a big, it's like these, it's
Yeah,
just an
it's a
asterisk.
symbol saying somewhere in this area, we need a park.
Yeah, we can definitely make that recommendation. Add that to the plan.
I'll just add that I know that this has been like the way this is laid out along the river has been talked about for a long time. It looks pretty good. The extra on-street trails to allow the connectivity between the places. To me, it looks really good. I agree that the park should be in that area to distribute it some. But otherwise, I haven't seen any issue with this other than I like it. We love the River Walk is going to continue both directions as far as we can. So.
Yeah, and I think in the original concept, when we were showing, those areas that people thought were annexation areas, we did have a concept of a park over in this, and this actually might need to be updated. The school district, purchased property out there as a holding use, and we were originally proposing some sort of a park out there in the county. So that was originally going to serve that quadrant, but since that concept is going away, then it definitely makes sense to add in the trail, the park in this
Can you
section.
access the Morgan wildlife, or is that like shut down? There's no going in that property. Is it a good place to go for a hike if there were a trail there?
Talking about?
The
Top right. green.
the top right green, the wildlife area. Just wondering about maybe
Are you talking about
a
this?
trail connecting
Oh, that.
into that.
So right now, I think the city is negotiating access, and that's,
Oh, okay.
with the gravel pit, they're trying to see if between
But-
the federal land and the gravel pit, if there's anything that can happen there to provide access.
what do you visualize in that pink area? What do you get it set up as?
Pardon?
The pink area, what are you calling that?
That is, so right now that's shown as a special use park. And that may just be trails where it's possible, it's super steep. It may just be open space.
That
Um,
area is the spring protection zone.
Yeah, so
So
it would have to
people aren't
be,
allowed to walk in that area.
Okay.
So I'm not sure why we got that as a park.
okay,
It's a spring protection zone.
okay. We'll make that note,
Which pink area we're talking about?
The only one I see up there.
in that area. Yeah.
Got it.
The situation of that wildlife area is that it's landlocked from any public access. If you establish public access, then you have another question. We thought that was a viable situation, but DWR, since it's a wildlife protection area, they're not interested in people walking that area.
Yeah, I know it's seasonal access in some of the other WMAs. So it's not like it's going to be open access year round all the time. Absolutely.
I think that's the other one in Ogden Valley is kind of just outside of Huntsville. There's one of those, and certain times of the year you can go in, and other times it's closed down. East
Mhm.
Canyon too.
So we want to go back to land use or?
I had one more parks question.
Okay.
I did see the park acreage per capita was low in Morgan, like how much parkland you have per capita is low. You want to push that? I mean, the plan says to keep the same per capita. I'm asking the question, should that actually even grow? So you're having, instead of keeping the same amount of parkland that you have now per capita, should that actually be a higher number as a goal in terms of, and there's passive parks, but then there's active parks, for sports and things like that as well.
What's your reason for suggesting increase that?
Well, it's a question, is it sufficient now? Let's just say Morgan didn't grow at all, and so you just paused. How it is now, for those that are playing sports or you want to get out and go to different kinds of parks, whether it's passive or active, do you feel like it's good? Or do you wish you had more park space, especially somebody that's involved in recreation and knows that there's fields for practice or different sports?
Yeah, and that's a philosophical question for the city. Do you want to grow? Do you want to, some cities really decide they want to be the recreation mecca. And so they are, just really pushing, the acreage and the facilities and trying to bring in tournaments and that sort of thing. And I'm trying to remember from the survey, I think we asked a specific question about recreation and I think people were generally satisfied. And so I think that's why we were, I'll have to double check that though, but I'm pretty sure they were
And I think that's-
generally satisfied.
Sorry, go ahead and finish.
Oh, you're fine.
I think that's a key point is, if we look at the guiding principle, as Justin's saying, provide a comprehensive connected network of parks, trails, recreation, amenities, all such. For residents, is what it says. A healthy lifestyle for residents offers opportunities to gather as a community. That's different than a tourism area. In other words, we get a lot of people that love this valley and there's plenty of locals that'll ride through the valley too. But on the weekends, most of the people that are up here in their biker gear are not from Morgan. They're coming up and using. And so I'm just wondering if there's first of all, if that's an issue. So second of all, how can we promote that more for, the residents and or both so that it's a destination? These people coming up to ride their bikes on Saturdays, they have to go back down to Ogden to have lunch. And so I'm trying to think how to, does this plan, which to me looks like the right architecture, the right framework. And to your point, it's a multi-decade vision that needs to come to life here. This is not going to happen all at once, but it feels like it's the right thing. I just want to make sure that as we think about what is the right thing, is it the right thing that we've created a destination and that destination is for, for who? Residents and or tourists or both, or is there not room for both? Because sometimes it's hard to drive your car up to East Canyon because there's too many bikes, sort of a thing.
Yeah, and the plan speaks to tapping into both of those, taking care of the locals, but also making sure that you're taking advantage of the people that are already passing through, give them a reason to stop, So that's talked about in the economic development chapter, trying to tap into that market. And that's where, this regional park and regional water park, direct all of it so that you have kind of focused impact within the community. But then it's close enough by that, if you can develop this network out, you can be pulling those people into your commercial street, into your new downtown and start, getting them to leave more of their money behind.
To circle back to the idea of a passive versus an active park, I think passive parks, if you want to take a picnic, we're fine. Soccer fields, we could use more. So here's my question. Does the county have a lot of allowance in their plan for increased park space?
Well, so the idea, the county plan, we're also showing this future regional park there. So it's definitely going to take a partnership to make that happen.
Do they have spaces elsewhere, down in Mountain Green, Kent Smith Park, places like that, where they're looking at expanding for their recreation department?
Well, the county, their budget is so limited right now as it is. And so I think down the road, I think they'll be looking more at that capacity and how to make better use of what they have and expanding that. But right now, I think, securing the land is the most key component so that doesn't get eaten up in all the development that, is going to be coming.
One thing on that, you think about how the county most likely will grow. Mountain Green will grow a lot, Peterson probably quite a bit, and then there'll be a fair amount of scattered growth throughout. That scattered growth is not going to result in parks. And so that'll put more pressure on Morgan City. Maybe Mountain Green will pick up a second, maybe Peterson. But I don't see some of these rural areas with large lots that will continue to fill in. I'm just seeing, similarities. Heber City wishes they had a lot more park space, and Morgan's way different than Heber, but there is a similarity in terms of you are the center of the county and your own micro region.
Yeah, and Heber's making a strong investment in their parks. They're trying to upgrade all of their existing parks. They do have, I believe there's a special assessment area up there, recreation district that provides those larger parks. So that's another way that they're helping provide those services.
I don't want to belabor this whole topic, but last one, and it can be pretty quick. Is the county plan for Parks and Rec, does it include the golf course in Round Valley? Is that incorporated in any way?
I mean, it's there. It's not, it's not a specific highlight, I would say, of the recreation component. We're focusing more on the regional parks and the trails network. It is what it is, the golf course.
Okay.
So.
Typically, you don't include golf courses in your recreation numbers because it's a single sport, limited use.
Yeah, it would be a special use park or just not even calculated into level of service per se. If you're looking at, recreational acreage that serves the community, we don't typically calculate that because it's a pay to play facility.
It also could be a much larger facility. Just saying that's expansion area. But
I think it's important to understand that those areas, may have been a private for-profit golf course, but at one time there are also tennis courts, a swimming pool, a nice restaurant, and now it's a golf course, and those other things are no longer. So those are it feels like we're going the wrong direction on some of these things.
that was it on that one. This one.
Does Morgan City charge park impact fees for new development? Yes, okay.
Are you interested in typos?
You can always send us typos
Okay.
later, definitely. I'm sure.
I didn't know we had an East Cottonwood Creek run through town.
Pardon?
I didn't know we had an East Cottonwood Creek run through
Creek,
town.
yeah. Just renaming your waterways.
Any other thoughts or recommendations on the Parks and Rec category before we shift gears?
Well, just a question. Do we want to take any action on it? Do we want to add any more park space or are we okay with it as it is?
I would agree with Aaron's earlier comment. To be direct, I think there should be an increase in recreational areas that support sports and outdoor group activities, passive parks, great. But I think that we are lacking, surely lacking in those other areas as we expand, especially as more kids and families added. High school's growing, kids are growing, rec's growing, all that happens. So.
Yeah,
Jake, you mentioned maybe being below average on a per capita basis. Are we way below or just shortly below? Any idea
So
there?
I think you were about, is it 2 per acre?
Teresa, will you scroll up to the level of
Yeah.
service for parks? I think it's up, the level of service for parks where we show I think it's up above. The other direction. Keep going. Oh, okay, right there. So 3.14, that actually isn't too bad. We do a lot of parks and recreation master planning. Typically in less developed communities, that will be a little higher, maybe 4, somewhere in the 4s, but that really isn't terrible. And if you are looking at combining it with, the passive recreation system along the river and you focus, your new growth, your new park efforts on those active facilities like you're talking about, then I think that might be a good approach, even if you decided to maintain, this level of service.
So I would agree with what's been said, the specific action. I think there needs the plan looks good. I think it just needs a little bit of expansion. And just an example, you show a picture there of Fox Point Park. I live in that neighborhood, and we can rarely use the park because there's a soccer practice every morning, there's a football practice every night. We can't use our own park because there's always something there that's an organized event. And so more space like that would be helpful. So that's one thing. The second thing is, if you go back to the map, I'm unclear if there's a spot that's been designated. Again, we're talking future, not tomorrow, but for a rec center kind of concept that might make sense within the city. And I'm talking, if you look at what Farmington just put together with the Farmington Rec Center, and, they have the soccer fields and the fourplex thing for their baseball. They've got a building that has, a track and indoor track and 4 basketball courts and, something, it doesn't mean that that's what we need, but is there at least space that we're thinking of from a Parks and Rec standpoint of where that rec could actually take place? And a lot of communities do it in conjunction with school districts. And they'll have shared facilities that they alternate uses. So I don't care where, I just think it should be designated on the plan.
Yeah, so there are, different approaches you can take. A lot of communities will help finance schools so that they have access to the gyms, like they'll double the gym space so that then they have, a certain number of hours or days so that they have, use of that facility. Financing those facilities is just the biggest factor because they are, they're definitely not a low cost item, and you'll see a lot in Davis County where they've partnered up, multiple communities coming together or forming rec districts to be able to afford those types of facilities. We can add in a discussion there about the desire for a rec center and considering it in the future. But, at this point, we had not designated a specific area in the city to think about that type
So
of.
that would be a recommendation. Last call for any other thoughts on Parks and Rec.
Just a clarification, we have not for the design portion of this, and this is basically saying this is what came up, and so let's modify what you don't like or what you'd like to add.
Yeah.
For as far as like doing the park and, like the recreational things, those can also be, if I'm not wrong, it can be in your zoning code to allow those types of uses in your greater downtown mixed use area. You could, if you choose to do so. So for example, if you wanted to take that property that's east of the elementary school and make that if somebody comes up with the funding for a rec place, and if your zoning allows you to do that type of use in the greater downtown mixed use area, because we've adopted this, then you've got the opportunity to put it there. Without saying this specific area is only for this in your general plan. I think your general plan saying, hey, this is where we want to have densities, here's where we want to, maybe have some specialty areas. But then your zoning is what's going to get specific to the use in that area.
And on the rec center, you could have the goal of explore the feasibility of a rec center. What would be the right size? What would that cost? And what are ways that Morgan could actually do that? And so in the general plan, you don't say this rec center here, you just say, we want to explore this feasibility. And then at some point the city says, okay, we're ready to do that. And then you take it to the voters for a bond, or you find another way to pay for it. But getting it, this is the right place to get it in the general plan as let's look at that. And maybe it's a good idea, maybe it's not. Brigham City wanted a rec center. They took it to the voters, or the mayor and council wanted it. They took it to the voters said no. So we've got pause until the next generation looks at it.
And I realize there's those kinds of hurdles. I'm, part of me speaking from spending the last 16 years raising 4 boys, all involved in sports, going around to every sports venue in northern Utah and thinking, man, it'd be nice to have one of these in our town, and I'm tired of saying that. I'd like to actually have one in our town.
The Farmington one is not that expensive because it went on city land that was already owned for parks, and it doesn't have pools. Pools double or triple the cost of a rec center. So if you can swim in the river or at Como Springs, then it'll cost less.
All right, we're gonna wrap that topic here and transition. I think what I heard earlier was number 3, which is the principal.
You want to show HOA parks or just city-owned parks? Because there's an HOA park up there that you're not showing.
Yeah, I mean, we typically, we can add any HOA parks if there are some that we're missing off of this map, because they do help meet need. They're, obviously not under city control, but they do contribute to helping meet need within the community. So yeah, if we're missing some of those, definitely let us know.
I think one other thing, when we're talking about parks, a lot of us are thinking about a grass park, but the parks that I've experienced lately are very non-grassy. And I don't know if grass is the right responsibility. I understand more soccer parks would be nice, but there's cool parks that have almost no grass and they're fun to hang out at because there's lots of activities going on. And so the idea of,
Like St. George, like those kind of parks?
yeah, those guys have
So
some
you
pretty
can't-
cool
you can't
parks.
water the grass here?
Yeah. Anyways, just opening up our mind to only seeing a grass park in the view. You know what I mean?
Mountain bike parks, they're becoming really popular.
Yeah.
And the county has one.
Thank you. Moving to principle number 3, which is smart growth. Where development can occur, do it right. Let's talk about this. So these 200 notes that you've got over there, I'm expecting you to share.
You just want to toss the page to the mayor and I can. Oh, I'm talking. Past there. Mr. Little. Mr. Little.
Where do you want to start? What do you want to do?
Smart growth.
Talking about land use.
Couple principles to keep in mind. This is the general plan. It doesn't mean we are going to do this. This is just a hope and a dream. Currently, we'll go by our current zoning map, our current ordinances. They're still in place. They'll still affect what we do day by day. So part of the concept, as I see it, is to try and get this master plan to something we think in the future might be possible and feasible to do. Then we'll have to take a look at our ordinances and our current zoning map and see if we want to adjust or change it to fit or to match. If I understand the whole picture.
Yeah, that's generally what happens, is that you try to make sure that the plans are in alignment. But that doesn't mean you have to go through and comprehensively, update every single zoning ordinance. It may happen, piece by piece, and getting some key ones in place, like the greater downtown mixed use. If you really want to focus on that commercial growth, then figuring out if you want a form-based code for that area or just updating the ordinance for that area is probably one of your biggest items to tackle first.
The big question in my mind as we look at this is how do we balance the need the state sees for new affordable housing? How we balance the perception that we want to keep our open space available. To me, those two, at least I haven't figured that out yet. In my mind, those two still conflict.
Yeah.
Multiple places in the plan here, it says we want to preserve open space, preserve those kind of things. Talks about one way of doing that is for developments to bring in, in fact, the terminology is for to bring in conservation subdivisions. And that's great if you have a large piece of area that's not developed yet, to bring in the concept that was talked about. There's only one place that I know of that would be available, and that was already discussed. I won't cover that further. Most other areas I'm aware of in the community don't allow for that kind of concept because of how small the current ownership properties are. So I'm at a loss, quite frankly, how you keep open space and the rural atmosphere here available, but yet put this plan in place if we want to see this version, this plan in the future. If you want to stop talking, just say so. I can stop. I won't be offended at all.
So
Just stop me if you want. Go ahead.
You're saying that the conflict is that we want to grow. We want to have affordable housing because nothing's affordable right now. But we'd like to have the open and not so on top of each other.
And how you do both those.
Just a question on that, though, you referenced the state requirement. So it's a requirement that we have so much affordable housing.
They're pushing that, yes.
So Is there a how that has to be accomplished? In other words, does that have to be single family homes that are affordable? Or can it be apartments, or can it be condos, or can it be, in other words, is there a density requirement that goes along with that?
Somebody help correct me, but currently, as I understand it, with the number of apartments we've had put in place in this past year that are proposed, we're okay as far as the state requirements are for affordable housing. We're not against that affordable housing requirement at this point. So the question is down the road, how we look at that. Several things in my mind are still in conflict. And we talk about the downtown walkable area, and that sounds awesome. Sounds great. But in my mind, I come back with my other rational hard head and I say, where do you park everybody? Tough to do. You talk about access to the river, awesome concept. You talk about eateries over the river and all that kind of stuff, super neat. In my mind, I can visualize it, super neat and great. But when I put the FEMA map on top of that, it gives me a major problem. We can't build in those locations. And so to me, there's several conflicts in the ideal dream of what this plan proposes in the terminology of the day versus what really we want, really what really can happen. So to me, that's the controversy with at least I've been battling with as I've been looking through this. As I look at those densities in the two yellow areas and then also in the, I call the pink purple area, to me, I have, again, the concept is awesome and great. Thank you for your work. But in reality, is that what we envision the city we want it to be in 40 years? I understand they won't change this next week or next year, probably, because we got to change a bunch of ordinances, a bunch of current zoning plans before this can ever happen. But is this what we want to see? Let me tackle, if I can, the first one on your map is called the low density residential. It's on page 18. What that allows, and that on your map is that LDR, that yellow area out to the end. Pull back the map, please. If you look at the map, we're talking about that area in the light yellow. So the question is, what do we envision that to be in the future? What would we want to be? If we don't annex anything, which is another question, then that's the end of our city boundary. I think another question we want to ask as we go along here is, what do we consider and want to annex? I think it'd be valuable if we get at least this group look at that annexation potential to see if we annex it. If we do annex, and that next layer can be larger lots, then maybe it's okay to make these smaller. But I know the community feeling is not to have 8,000 square foot lots in either one of those two yellow areas. So do we cater to the community feeling? Or maybe that's my feeling too. Or do we look at what we think is best for the city in the future? And that lighter yellow area, you have several landowners. I don't see that coming in as one big piece. If it did, then you could do your overlay thing. If it comes in separate landowners, and as far as our growth goes, you talk about our population numbers being maybe smaller than they could be. That is limited by if current landowners sell or not. If I, Joe Grain, continue to farm my property, I want to farm for the next 50 years, you're not putting house one on that. And our population could stop growing. But if they sell it, then our population could grow. So there's some mixture things that are sitting out there. So I'm not sure the population numbers are that far off based on the fact that they won't grow until people decide to sell. There's several large property owners, and it's up to them what they decide to do. With that said, I don't know what you want to do density-wise in that lighter yellow area. And that's the one consideration for the group to decide what to do with that lighter yellow area. The gold area, if you will, the next color in, what I like to do, what I kind of did is, if we could overlay an actual city map of city streets and actual lots on top of that, you'll see that most all that area is currently in single family homes. A few small pieces like the Ruppin and things, a few small ones that could develop. So if you put this in place, that doesn't affect current ownership. I understand that. So those two fringe areas, like for example, the Rupp piece, do we want to have those pieces develop into the R15? And I don't know if it's a matter of what we want or what we envision happening. And we know I guess sort that out in our minds. What do we want versus what do we envision happening in that area? Did that make any, I hope that makes some sense to somebody. I'm trying to say, how do we sort that out? I don't know. I need some help how to sort that out.
Well, you're talking this right now. So right now where the medium density is all right now, low density in our current zoning.
Yeah.
So that is an
Medium
issue.
kicks it down.
Uh,
I think it's very.
Can I make a recommendation on this? Don't think about this as zoning. You have to kind of say, okay, the zoning map is over here and it's separate. And it's really hard, but you can't combine the two. You have to say, because the general plan is broader, it's a bigger picture, and there's a lot of zoning options within those. And so having a range is definitely the right approach. And then you say, at some point, these areas may rezone and it'll go towards this. But you definitely don't want to go to the level of exact numbers or exact sizes of lots, but having the general area. And then when the time comes to do a rezone, that's when you look at it and do the research.
Let me ask this, just to put what you're talking about, Ray. We've got you started with that light yellow, the low density residential, which I agree with you. I think that the public sentiment is that 8,000's too small for that area. What I'm wondering is, do we have to limit ourselves in some of these defined spaces like this, or can we have different types of development, not a development agreement, but basically a style of development where why not in one area? Yeah, you've got an acre lot, and then you might have a 10,000 square foot lot next to it, and as opposed to, all right, because I can, I will, and I'm going to create every lot the minimum size I can to maximize my investment. If we had that variety, and I've referenced it before, but there's at one point there was this concept that was becoming popular of new urbanism, the Congress of New Urbanism, and part of those philosophies were exactly that rather than having this area you do this and this area you do that, but there's a lot more nuance within those areas and variety within those areas. And I'm wondering if that might help address some of what Mr. Little's talking about, because he opened with a valid question of, how do we accommodate or resolve this paradox of maintaining a rural atmosphere as we become more urban? And it's still Morgan. And we're not talking Manhattan here. 1,000 people in the next 20 years is not huge growth, but still we want to do it right, which is the whole point of this. And to me, doing it right is keeping the higher densities in the centralized areas. I grew up in the slums there of Morgan, where that asterisk is, that major gateway under the bridge. So
Look how well you turned out.
it can be done, I guess. But my point is, because of that, I consider myself a city boy, right? I mean, I grew up in Morgan, but I'm a city person because I was in the central business district and I walked wherever I needed to go and I rode my bike wherever I needed to go. So my concept of a city is like that. And it feels like that density in the central business district is where we don't want to lose that. And then that creates that density there so that these outer areas where MDR and LDR, we don't have to get, 1,000 people over the next 20 years is not going to create high-rise buildings all throughout the city. We might have a few 5 or 6 story buildings downtown, but that's probably okay.
But like Ray said, there is an element of if you build it, they will come. People will fill whatever space there is. So if the high rise is there, it'll fill up. And so we need to be proactive in our planning and decide what we want it to look like. So where we want the high rise in Morgan. If we were to take what I understood Teresa's suggestion to be, and correct me, Teresa, if I misunderstood, And we basically eliminated the medium density residential south of the freeway and just made that all low density residential and left the MDR above the freeway, would we meet requirements
As far as.
as far
affordable
as our
housing?
affordable housing?
Well, affordable housing is a different animal. It's not
Yeah.
just, you know.
And
this land
affordable
use-
clearly doesn't mean affordable. So what do they really mean?
So
Because
aff-
the townhomes are $450,000 and there are affordable housing.
So affordable housing is based on the area median income in the county. And so it's like there's a 30% level, a 50% level, and an 80% level. And the state requires that you meet at least there's a list of over 20 strategies for how to achieve that. And obviously, everybody's trying, but the market is what it is. And, you know, I mean, so the state's doing everything they can to encourage that, but you have to have a specific analysis and plan just on the affordable housing. So, you know, that's part of this, and that's part of why we're trying to allow flexibility in these mixed use areas so that you can start to target some of those uses, but you also have to have multiple strategies for that. So, yeah. it's
Can I
not
just clarify one point that Jake made, just for my own mind? In my mind, you made the point that I took it this way. This actually doesn't even matter because the zoning map is what actually matters, and that comes later. And so I'm making a big deal. So in my mind, this should map very closely to the zoning map. You're saying keeping them separate because this doesn't actually translate down into what is going on at the application level.
This
Yes, sir.
supplies the big picture vision and so,
This is what we want the zoning map to be in the future?
but there's details below that. So
Right.
let's just say, you know, that I like the other plan where you had like all the different areas in the greater downtown mixed use, and that can still happen. Or in the MDR, there could be 3 or 4 zones within the MDR. So each of these provide this kind of broad level vision, and then zoning, it's at that detail. And you can have multiple zones within a future land use, but collectively, it's kind of the same idea.
Okay.
And this is based off the principle of like a transect of going from the downtown to the middle area to the more rural. And then when you leave the city, you're in the country.
This is much more high level. This is 30,000 foot view, and we're trying to look at it at the 1-inch view.
Exactly.
I'm looking at it like the block right there is wrong, and I should be like, 30,000 foot view, that right there is a range or a valley. And so I'm feeling like that's what's really blocking our progress is we want to make sure we don't make a mistake and get it down into a zoning issue, right? And to me, there's a big gap. We need to either just get past it and be like, I don't really care what this says, because the zoning is going to be the real true thing.
Well, but when you go to do zoning, you look, and this reference you, but you're right, it is high level,
Okay.
and there is that detail to be.
An applicant can ask you to change the zoning because the master plan calls.
And that's a.
Is there a benefit to having this general plan pretty well buttoned up down to a zoning type level, or not so much?
It's vision, goals, strategies, principles, but it's not zoning. Zoning changes
Yeah.
year to year.
Jake, though, suppose we have we accept a plan with a 15 unit per acre density, and that's our general plan. 5 years from now, the developer comes in and says, by the way, city, I'd like to do a 15 unit per acre development. The fact that it's in the general plan, and that's what we've said we would follow, seems to me it's a pretty good argument that we may need to do that. I realize that maybe you can't, but why would you say, no, we're not going to ever allow that, and then have it in the plan?
Well, and if you want to bring the number 15 down, then do it. But they're also within the plan. There's a lot of other things. There's recommendations for parks and trails and
Sure.
different, that's where you look at zoning.
But the
They don't,
developer's going to
they
hand us the
can't,
plan and say,
they can't
I'd
walk
like-
in and do that. That's a legislative decision.
Can I, to
If we-
talk with what,
never go along with it, why start?
But this should match the vision you want. but it needs to be a high level vision.
Sure. Well, that's a great point, but yeah, maybe is it not matching?
I think, and I think where Ray is coming from and what Jay was trying to say, the problem is that if, as soon as you put this out there and the landowners do see this, it does set a precedent or an expectation, and we might not want that. Right now, this is all zoned low density where you have it as medium density. It's setting in their mind that they can do that. I can see where the issue can be. So I think what we're trying to get to here is it putting us in a difficult situation, in a difficult circumstance here when someone sees this and they're like, oh, well, if I can do that, I will now go ahead and put all these, apartments and lower density or higher density places in places that we don't want that. So we better be careful on how we label this now if when we release it out, because,
Yeah, exactly.
okay.
Yeah.
I think that's the concern we wanted to make sure.
There's that, and just to echo that point, there's a word that I've heard a lot over the years when these projects come before the planning commission that for a zoning change or what have you, and we'll look at the general plan, and that word is deference. There's deference given to the general plan because of the amount of rigor that went into developing it and the public input that went into developing it. So yes, once we put it out there, we've set, the cat's out of the bag. We've set an expectation, and now we do, by default have to give deference to that. It doesn't mean you need to follow it exactly in every situation, but if you're not, it gets a lot stickier. So that's something that I agree that we need to be pretty careful of. And what I've heard a couple of times is that maybe that MDR reverts back to what it might have been originally, LDR. Now
It is already.
Still
LDR.
high level.
okay, so
It looked like they all kind of got moved down a level as you.
You
Yeah.
should also keep the MBR and then dial the numbers down, so you have that
But,
transition.
that's- keep in mind, our current LDR designation is 1 to 3. So it's even lower than the lowest that you've got here. In fact, we had an 8,000 square foot designation that we did away with. Do you remember, Ray, when that was and why it
I
was?
don't remember. We no longer have 8,000 square foot as part of our code. Our ordinance is no longer part of the ordinance. 10,000 square foot is small.
Is the minimum.
We have in our current ordinance.
It is still in the code, but it's overridden in the
Okay.
code.
When they did it.
Can I bring up something that's more specific to an area? But one that's just for fun for me. There's an LDR in the bottom right-hand corner there. It's on the hillside. It's up the M hill
Are you
down
talking
the
about
bottom right. Like that is not buildable space. So if
Yeah.
we're counting that towards buildable space, we shouldn't do it there. I mean, maybe we could do some cliffside villas. Yeah, that is
Yeah.
not buildable.
Totally not.
Teresa, go to
Nothing
page
but-
79.
That wasn't my one. I was just making that as a
Teresa,
comment.
you go to page 79, you'll see the slope.
Mountain Goat Farmer.
My thing on this was actually in the North Morgan area. We have that as MDR. It's already being a lot of that right now. The one thing that I'm on a master plan like this is there is really no services on that side of the tracks. We talked about that with the trail system. The access across the tract is very difficult. When you look at the type and the number of houses and units that are in there and which will continue to be there, there is no services, nothing over there, right? What I want to look at was the intent, I'm thinking, so one place I can see is if there are going to be services there, it's got to be down on that highway frontage area, right?
There's your slope, Justin. that,
Yeah.
Says, that unless you wanted to build on the M, I
It could
guess.
be great. But specifically on that North Morgan area, to me, it's a concern because every time I go up around that area, I'm like, wow, there's a lot of people here and there's no services, right? There's no gas station, there's no store, there's no business, there's no commercial except for the dealerships there. Is that a concern, and should we make sure that we have that master plan properly?
It's only a half a mile from the service.
It's so far.
This is the Young dealership is there just one dealership?
Well, here's what I'm saying is going back to what Nate said on that high density in the center of town, right? Right now, we've got very high density on that side that's away from the center of town. Unless we start to build some better accessibility down there with some of the trails, and maybe that can happen. It seems like it's going further away from the city center where we want to concentrate the higher density.
Teresa, do you want to go back to the land use now? Sorry.
I
Should have
just
that one
want to do a quick time check. We have 20 minutes before the general session starts tonight for the planning commission. We're going to wrap up here at 5:02. So we've been here for 2 hours. That gives a little bit of a break to freshen up before the live session. So we have 15 more minutes essentially.
Let me give a recommendation if I might. We each of us take the thoughts we've had tonight, that we have some more work sessions rather than tonight, and you come back with your thoughts on how to adjust and change this rather than kicking this any further. Like some other stuff like maybe bring up. I think if we bring up topics tonight, that gives us a chance to then to think about them and come back with some answers next time. Release your thoughts next time. If I can propose that, Nate.
Absolutely.
Okay. I hesitate. One more shot. The GDMU one. Understand that off to the left, to the top, the west, whatever. That's a big one landowner owns that, and we could do those overlays was talked about. But if we don't, if one person went and bought that, what says it could go in there could be commercial, multifamily, light industrial, or recreational. That's the terminology that could go in that area. And again, I hope that landowner farms it for another 150 years and never sells it. But if they do, and this current wording, it could go straight to apartment buildings,
Well, and that's why,
unless you put on the overlay you talk about.
yeah, thinking about, if it's a form-based code or design guidelines
Yeah.
or your zoning ordinance, getting more specific, like Jake's saying, kind of, if you want to break that down, similar to that concept that we had in the fall, the earlier concept that we took to the public, those are all things to think about moving forward with that designation. But like Jake said, this is the kind of the big vision, and does the big vision meet your goals? And, maybe we need to make adjustments to the low density and the medium density residential, because this should represent kind of what you want to see for the future. This is your guiding document.
Okay, if I can move, let me move on. Just hit a couple more quick things people think about. If you page 23 to 25 talks about districts. We don't have those at this point. I think we ought to take a look at that and see if we were to create some of those districts, would that help alleviate some of our questions if we develop some of those kind of districts? So page 23 to 25 talks about some other kinds of districts. That's something we could consider potentially putting in the code and ordinance to alleviate some of our questions on numbers. That make any sense? Okay, if we go to page 25, look about annexation boundaries. I kind of discussed that. I don't know if we want to talk about annexation. I guess put that in your think process. And for the future, we want to talk about any annexation or not, and take a look at the boundaries being different than they currently are. I just pose that as a question to consider and think about. If you move on to page 26 to 30, talks about a community character. How do we preserve it? Zoning maps and ordinances need to come along, and I think Jake's got probably gonna have some ideas to help us with different zoning terminologies and different zoning kind of things. Overlay maps will help alleviate that. I think we need to consider the community character. As I look at page 30, top of the recommendation, that top suggestion there, that open census, the land use recommendations on the general plan help meet the community priorities to preserve the small rural western town character of Morgan, protecting agriculture and utilizing smart growth. That terminology is throughout the whole plan. So if we're going to do that, we need to consider ways to have our ordinances and zoning maps coincide with that. If you go to page 37, on transportation, I think the thing we need to consider there, we have a transportation master plan map. We probably ought to bring it to a meeting and look at it, see if we want to change that master plan street map. Would be the takeaway I'd have from that section. Do we want to have a master, do we want to look at and adjust or change our master plan street map on that section there?
Ray, is that available online? I was looking for that. but
I
couldn't
don't
find
know.
it.
Teresa,
No, it's not online. We did have it when we did go through this, but I don't have it online. It needs to be updated because it's a master plan and some roads will be deviated.
that wasn't mentioned all in here, and I wonder if that ought to be. I guess my thought would be to include that future road plan as part of this general plan. Similar thing to the sidewalk plan on page 37. 37 talks about the sidewalks. It shows current sidewalks. To me, it'd be an interesting process to include or think about a future sidewalk plan. To see where we want to have those for safety reasons. That's not part of this at all.
I would agree
Go ahead.
that those, the sidewalk and the roadways, the side of the roads make a massive difference in the way the town is perceived. So
Yeah, and this isn't, a sidewalk master plan per se, but, the plan is intended to set forth those policies, like improve that connectivity. And we want to make sure that we have all of those policies to meet those goals that you do have for making those connections.
But that's something, another piece we need to look at, I guess, bring back your ideas. If any one of these things I mentioned speaks to you, do some work on that and bring that one back to us with some of your thoughts and suggestions on that. As I move to page 44 and 45, it talks about growth things, population growth. I'm not sure why that pink area shows no population growth at all on page 45, that map. To me, that's a.
Do you want to go to that on
question.
the, I
Page 45.
think it's one of the transportation maps.
some of it maybe they're not.
They're going off of the regional transportation planning statistics, so that would have to be a question for Fair and Pierce.
Anyway, this shows the green, the bottom area that we've already talked about that being the heaviest growth area.
Yeah.
If we change our densities, then this map won't be correct anymore. This map won't be valid.
Showing less growth in the center and more on the outside. The TASs are really high level, not that accurate at this level of city planning, but they are helpful for WFRC and MAG. They
Yeah,
run these huge models, the big black box that is transportation modeling.
yeah.
Page 49 talks about the RPO.
Mhm.
To my knowledge, that doesn't exist anymore. I don't know if we leave it in there or not. Maybe Ty can clarify that, but I don't think the RPO exists anymore. With Weber or just Morgan County? So it's just Morgan City, Morgan County. Weber is not part of that RPO anymore. So change the wording on that one. On page 49, page 51. I like the way that's worded. I personally identify that. I think it's a great wording on that recommendation. Very well done on that one. Page 65. I'm not sure I understand a piece of that. On the right-hand side, page 65, second paragraph under number 1, it says, residents have expressed a desire for smaller lots within the city. I don't know if I've ever heard that from residents. I'm not sure where that came from. And then the last line says, transitioning some of the areas zone R, especially R18, to new smaller scale requirements, so we're going to go smaller than 1R8, will provide a variety of housing, opportunities, and natural local growth through cycles transition while maintaining agricultural and open space. I'm not sure how you transition everything to R15, how that maintains open space and agriculture.
Well, and again, this is, I think, some of these statements were written in the context of Morgan City's place within the county. And so helping preserve, open space within the county and more rural lands within the county. Obviously, like you're saying, trying to provide housing and commercial and maintain rural character of the city, those can be at odds. And so it's when you look at the bigger picture and the context of it in the county that you help preserve some of those uses.
Okay, so if that's considering the county, not just city.
Yeah, exactly. And we should, clarify some of that language in the
And I
plan.
think
if that's good.
defining that is important because, rural doesn't necessarily mean farmer. We have a lot of farmers in this community and they provide a wonderful part of our culture. But rural means other things too, and we should understand that because to Ray's point, it is sprinkled throughout the entire plan, but most of the people that live in the city limits are not farmers, but it's still like a rural atmosphere. So what does that actually mean? And I think that's important to understand.
On 66, we need to decide what we want to do with the ADU concept. ADU is new terminology the legislature put out. We need to take a look at that and decide, learn what it is, and decide if we want to include that in all residential areas or if we don't. The ADU is an accessory dwelling unit where I can turn my garage into an apartment, or I can build an apartment in my backyard that's only 10 foot off my house and have somebody live in my backyard and in a playhouse. I mean, in an apartment. So we got to decide if we want to do that or not.
State
I'm up.
law requires it in all residents.
ADUs.
Yeah. House Bill 82, 2020.
But right now it's only for
No,
internal,
it's not.
within your main structure, right? It's,
Yeah.
Again.
but as far as those other types, like you're talking about, like the mother-in-law apartment, something over the garage, something that's detached, then those are options to explore what sort of forms you want to allow
A
within your
year
community,
ago,
or
that
do
didn't
you?
include
Or
everybody. A year
in
ago, we were
certain
exempt.
areas,
Did
it
they
doesn't
change
have
that
to
this
be
year?
everywhere.
So the House Bill 82 is within the footprint of the home.
Within the
The
footprint,
current footprint,
which,
where it is, cities have.
Okay.
allowed. But the minute you're adding on, whether it's detached or attached, then the city can decide.
okay. So part of that question, and currently then, within my home, can I turn my basement into an apartment if I live in a single family, area? State law says yes. In the past, we have kind of fought that. It was not illegal and people turn their neighbors in when they had somebody living in their basement. So that's now carved per state law. We need to adjust our ordinance so it allows that. If that's state law, we need to address it as a group. So we understand that concept, the ADU.
And it goes all the way down. I was looking at it for Hannaford.
Okay.
And of course, they would be the smallest town and there's no size on that in terms of the city.
Okay, 73, just interesting to me. People are saying they want more plumbers, electricians. We have gobbles and googles of electricians and plumbers. That's interesting. Not that's wrong. It's interesting. That's they say they want more plumbers, more electricians. We have tons of those. Okay.
It did mention in the beginning that food options were highly
Yeah.
recommended. That one I do believe.
Yeah. 81 to 83 talks about some river resources. Some terminology I'm not aware of it, or like it talks about this being the Weaver River watershed area. And I thought watershed was where the source of where the river obtained its water from. I didn't know that Weaver River's watershed area, Reese Canyon watershed area. I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah, we were just looking at the watershed mapping for the area.
Look at what?
Yeah, and we can revisit that if we're off on the description of that.
I think the clarification there is a protected watershed is where you're getting your water from. And then in terms of watershed terminology, we all live in a watershed that's all, going somewhere. And so that sometimes that protected watershed water source gets confused with watershed planning in general.
Yeah, with the physical, like where the water's actually flowing in the
Yeah.
waterway that it's going to. Yeah.
Okay. Also talks about the Cottonwood Creek watershed area.
If you want to wrap up with your final
Yep.
point, we'll stop there.
Sorry. Just a couple of quick ones. 87. We have electrical service. It's not listed as one utilities, city electrical service. It's not listed as one utilities, and we do have that. 89 says there's no curbside recycling. Yes, there is curbside recycling in the community. There's some more. That's good enough.
Yeah, and something too for some of the more language changes and typos and things like that, maybe get those to Teresa and she can communicate those to us. And then you guys can keep focusing on these big topical issues that you want moving forward.
We're going to wrap up our work session at this point. Lisa, thank you so much for moderating, facilitating, sharing. I appreciate that. And all the actions that have come out of today, we'll capture in our minutes. But also, I like the recommendation for the homework assignment with respect to continuing to read through this draft plan as we have ongoing work sessions, prior to, making this an official document. So thanks, everyone. We've got 5 minutes until the general session.
Okay, if I dump that for you. You need those extra napkins?
You never know.
I'll leave them there.
We'll leave one, just in case a drool or something.
Lots of good notes. Here you go. There you
Oh, I just came from meetings in Salt Lake. I just always like to be ready. Really, it's not my. So I basically work for council. I tried to, well, and I tried to. Before. I started this project. When I first started, we were, why would we want to do our town? But we worked on it. So I love this. So once the project, I just started. Yeah, that's what planning commission is supposed to do. On some of those reasons. Yeah, no, we don't want that heavy. So this will all. This will all work. No, I think they want it. Thank you. Appreciate it. I better hold it for that meeting.
I was telling them, we want to hear everyone's perspective, even if it's not what they feel like everyone else wants it. It makes a better outcome. That diversity of opinion makes a better outcome.
If you, I'll have you come up here. and I'll be
Well, the very
easier.
first thing I saw, the pictures you went through were the Democrats. I thought, I just can't believe it. Could have grown that. I mean, they're basically all past.
Even though there's constraints, yeah, you have to always- I get it.
That's right.
I get it. But
Yeah.
even with that.
And then John, you covered.
Yeah.
I know science.
It's like a
other than
subdivision
my-
mind. Subdivision mind, Jim.
So see if you're on the same page. So I have an RM 15.
Kids selling off to pay
Just
the
roll
state
it.
taxes.
Or I like what Teresa said about just making it whatever the light yellow was. And not always the number. It's still higher than I would want, which is overview enough to give us some leeway in zoning, I think, but. If that for some reason is not.
How are you?
Then yeah. we just-
Good.
Well, here's my question. How many times do we have to talk about it and just take action on it? Because I think all of this kind of agrees. Next time I'm moving for a vote. Because especially if we all agree, we're all saying the same thing. Yeah, we don't want it to be rushed. But maybe it's time.
If everybody.
See, I need the patience that you have.
Well,
Let it
it's just
take
from
its time.
experience. Sitting on the
Yeah.
that experience. You know, it was just a global experience. Because they're smarter than we had the Germans.
Plan for it. Yeah. Yeah. And I think it'll work out. And I think most of the plan is really
Yeah,
great.
that's too.
I just think there are a couple areas where we gotta go. down the path. That's not what we want.
It ain't all about us.
Oh, no. And it's not all gonna look like the pictures that they put in there. Yeah, I'm looking at that going, that's nice.
I've heard of spot, yeah, it's called spot developments, say you have 10-acre development. We got about 10 acres and the rest of it's.
And I would be open to something like that.
Probably, you know, with taking care of a half-acre lot. It's ugly.
Yeah. And there are still some that can be done. What's the open space? And I would like the ownership.
Like me, that's part of it.
Because I think that's better for all of our property values. People take better care of their own homes. So we'll see.
I could need a whole one of those up here.
It's pretty rich, isn't it?
Where'd you find that?
They get rid of them.
I cut a little tiny piece.
Well, that's all I wanted was a bite, but I missed it.
They took it away, huh?
Once we get everyone back, we'll start.
My daughter's at the Utah State and one of her roommates works for Crumble Cookie.
Oh,
And so
really?
at night when she closes, she'll bring home all the leftovers. She gets more than enough cookies.
Well, Humble Cookie was founded in Logan. Their headquarters are in Provo now.
Oh, are they?
And unfortunately.
They were originally a local from town.
And they have 400 locations. It really is. What a story.
Oh, I guess they found. That hard to make. Everybody likes to take a train.
Well,
ride
it's
through
a
it.
very unique model. They're always rotating. but It's not the same thing every time.
Anyway, yeah, let me,
Yeah.
Actually, from the
So
business
people keep
perspective, it's
checking the
smart.
website. What do they have this week?
Oh, you gotta go in. It's a limited time. It creates that sense of
Yeah.
urgency.
That's true. I didn't think that through.
All right, as we're waiting for the rest of the commission members to come back, for those in the audience, if you have not already signed in, please do so. So we have record that you're here. Where's that sign up sheet, Teresa? It's coming around. Perfect. Thank you. I think we're still missing 2 commissioners, so we'll start as soon as we're all up here. All right, I think we've got a full quorum that we can go ahead and get started with. Welcome to tonight's Planning Commission meeting. Tonight is Tuesday, May 17th, 2022. My name is Nathan McClellan. I'm the chairperson of the Morgan City Planning Commission, and we are ready to kick off our agenda for the evening. Just by way of announcement, keep in mind that this session is being live streamed on YouTube and also being recorded. So that everybody's aware of that. We will go ahead and get started first by going through our minutes from our previous meeting back in April, on April 19th. The minutes for that session have been distributed. At this time, I would entertain a motion to either amend and or accept those minutes.
I make a motion that we accept them as they are.
Thank you. There's a motion on the table. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you, Justin. Any discussion prior to voting? All in favor of accepting minutes as is, please indicate. It's unanimous. We will now move into our agenda. We've had a couple of changes in the last, I think in the last few days where we pulled 1 or 2 things off the agenda, but we do have 4 items. We'll take them in the order that they're listed, with the exception of the item number 2, which has been removed from the agenda. So the first agenda item is the conditional use permit, historical guideline review of the studio apartment located in the rear of Grounds for Coffee, located at 167 Commercial Street. Jake has been helping with the transition and coordinating with staff as we've gone through trying to get ourselves oriented to all these different projects. At this time, Jake, I'll turn it over to you to kind of give us some orientation on this one.
Thank you, Chair. Teresa, do we have a map that we could pull up? Is that part of the? Yeah, there it is. And then if you could pull up maybe the zoning maps too. We'll keep that open for the meeting, kind of let everybody know where the property is. So this is an existing building located on 167 North Commercial Street. So it's an existing building that is in the central commercial zone. And then the applicant would like to add accessory residential dwelling, essentially an apartment at the back. And under the CC zone, that is a conditional use, which is why the applicant has made the application for that. The historic zone does recommend residential in terms of the general use of residential in the historic overlay. And so that is recommended there. The historic zone overlay does recommend it as a second floor, but that does not permit it at the ground floor. So as a conditional use, residential could be permitted according to the Planning Commission recommendation on this. Give Teresa just a second to pull that up.
While she's pulling it up, I did have a question. The use has changed with respect to this particular location within the Grounds for Coffee building. Is that accurate in the sense that I thought that was like a fishing supply shop back there? Has that been vacated and now we're moving to this?
My understanding, that's gone to a different building.
Okay.
And then the coffee shop is in the front part. So there it is right there. There's visitor parking out on the street, on Commercial Street. And then there is parking behind. It could be for that. And so as I've looked at this, staff, we recommend this. And then we do have one condition recommendation that the applicant require that parking be designated behind the building and have a sign for, tenant parking and that. And I believe the applicant does have a representative here. Somebody here
Yes.
representing Jeff?
Yes.
Okay. And if you want to make any comments or if the Planning Commission has any questions for the applicant representative.
Anything that you'd like to add, but as you speak into the microphone, if you just start by stating your name for the record.
Yeah, my name's John Patterson, Mr. Chair. I am here on the behalf of Jeff Matthews, who is working on this. And just to fill in some information Mr. Young presented, the fishing store has moved. It was in the back of that building. For business purposes, it was a poor location. As the owner of the old bank building, I frequently had people coming in that building. Where's the fishing store? Where's the fishing store? So they have moved over into a section of the old Morgan Mercantile building and will be operating out of there. In terms of historical use along there, the old Stewart's Restaurant and the old building next to it have ground floor apartments to the rear. The Vallis Hotel has had apartments on the second and third levels as well as in the basement. And there's now some apartments over in the old Williams stores on 101 Commercial Street. There is space to the rear of I refer to as the old dealership building, Grounds for Coffee, for 4 parking spots. 2 of those could easily be designated for tenant parking only.
And how is that accessed? What's the drive to get there?
There is a avenue of a prescriptive easement that has existed for over a century for the rear of all of those buildings through there, as well as a city easement. And the area to the back of the coffee shop is now paved.
Thank you. Anything else to add?
I think I'm good at the moment.
All right, thank you for that overview, Jake, and I'm sorry, I forgot your name, but John, Jake and John, appreciate that. So a couple of things. We had a recommendation by Commissioner Reese as we jump into some of these items that we go through, that we designate part of our responsibility going into. There's certain parts of our responsibility that can be legislative. The last 2 hours of our working session where we're working on amending the general plan as an example of that. There's much of what we do is administrative and reviewing the Morgan City Code and ensuring that the projects are in compliance with the land use ordinances of the city. And this is one of those cases on the administrative side of things. So just one question on my end, then I'll open it up to the commission, and that is, being in a historical overlay zone, is there anything that's changing to the facade off of Commercial Street that would need to come under our review?
Mr. Chair, there is no changes to the facade of the building or the structure itself as it currently stands. The only change would be to the where it says entry on the part that you've just pulled up. The door, the commercial door would be removed and a residential door will be put in.
Okay, thank you. And again, just for members of the commission, as a conditional use, our responsibility is not to determine whether or not this should go here, but whether or not any nuisances that this use introduces can be adequately mitigated. Assuming that can be, then by ordinance we move forward with granting the conditional use. So what I've heard so far from staff is that one nuisance would be that there's limited parking on State Street, so have tenant parking be in the rear as one of those conditions. But let me open it up to the rest of the commission for discussion on this agenda item.
I guess one of the questions I have, is this going to be a nightly rental type place, or is it going to be a residence?
It will be a long-term rental.
Okay, because I saw you had 2 queen-size beds in there, like at the hotel room or something. That's the impression I got, so. But it's going to be a residence. Okay.
Nightly rental would be per ordinance. I don't know that it's allowed there. Teresa? It's not. So, okay.
The only other question I would have is that there's currently undeveloped land. It's on that back side. Now, the roadway that's granted there seems fine. It's been there for a while. Is there any nuisance or problem with a future development that would go right there on the backside of the mobile homes and next to the laundromat that could cause a future issue that we can't see now?
Roadway through there.
Yes.
So, Mr. Chair, just to let you know, the Google map underneath is pretty good. But there it is now, an easement here that goes all the way along.
All the way through the
That
motel.
will be for a future lane once this development happens, so that we have some connections. And all of these businesses will have access to the back of the property from that lane.
And John mentioned that right of way's been there for a while.
There's been
It's
a
just,
prescriptive easement for a little while, but it is actually a recorded easement
okay,
now.
okay. So it goes from, what is that, 125 north all the way to the hotel.
I believe it starts here and it doesn't it?
Goes all the way to the motel.
Yeah, it goes all the way to the.
So Justin's question is what happens on the other side of that lane and, in that, yeah, it is, okay.
Yeah, does the parking spot encroach on that at all? Okay, so as long as that's there and there's access off both sides, that was my question. I know that's a future look into what's going to be developed there, but
Yeah.
Touch the end of the building. From the end of the building, come down to that next line. That's where the parking space is. It's not in the roadway. The parking space is solely out of the roadway, so it doesn't encroach the roadway. And it's been asphalted already, that parking spot, it's parking space,
That's helpful.
big enough for 4 cars.
So it is there or already is in place, anything with respect to other potential nuisances. You get a rental with a teenager that's got their music blaring, or whatever in this area. Is that an issue or not? They burn their popcorn in the microwave and we got shared space whatever. I'm just trying to think, is there anything else that needs to be mitigated that we're not thinking of?
The applicant will have to provide plans for the building permit for the remodel, but that's a review by staff that does the building permits. So you don't need to worry about the inside.
I think it's a movement towards a mixed use concept idea. And there's nothing I'm aware of. Most research shows anything else. I'm prepared to make a motion, Mr. Chairman.
Please do.
I move that we grant the conditional use permit. And the only condition on that would be to designate the parking spaces, which John's already indicated they plan on doing anyway. You understand that they would, of course, then proceed with the city with the normal building application process and have to turn in the plans for their apartment.
Thank you. Do we have a second on the motion?
I second.
Any discussion prior to voting? All right, the motion on the table is to grant the conditional use permit as the applicant has requested, with the condition being parking designated behind the building. All in favor, please indicate. Teresa, that is unanimous. The conditional use permit is granted. Thank you, John.
You're welcome.
I will now skip agenda item number 2 and move to agenda item number 3. This is for the preliminary and final subdivision discussion / approval of the Rupp subdivision located at 400 West Island Road. Just as a reminder, we've had a number of meetings about this particular project that have involved public hearings and such. We're at the point now where we're moving towards, and part of the applicant's request is tonight for the final approval. Now, the other approvals that we've done, concept approval or preliminary approval, are within the jurisdiction of us as a commission to grant on our own. For the final approval, we'll be making a recommendation to the city council for that, if I've got my wires straight tonight. So that's the plan. That being said, Jake, if you'll again orient us to where we're at with this particular project.
Teresa, would you mind going back to the zoning? Let's zoom in on that so people could see where it's at. So that gives you an idea where the property's at. 400 West in the R112 zone. And as I've reviewed it for a previous meeting, last month's meeting, all of the lots do meet the zoning requirements in terms of the widths, the depths, all of that. Most of the work has been done by Matt Harvickson, really looking at the engineering. And he's gone back and forth with the applicant a number of times on engineering, and they've worked out the details in terms of getting the plat right and construction documents right. And Matt does recommend that it's ready for approval, meeting his final comments and notes.
Just to call it out specifically, then there are no open engineering items remaining on this particular project.
There are not. There's some little teeny minor corrections that will be done, but nothing that should hold it up for final.
And I think those have to be done to meet code anyway, so it's not necessarily a gray area on those items.
Okay, I'm going to give the floor to Mr. Little for a moment.
I appreciate the work that Matt did in your documents. There's the paperwork from Matt Harvickson, the engineer, and everything is completed or in progress, and it'll take place before the building permits can be issued. The electrical plans will be reviewed by the city electrician department. That'll take place. The only one that's in question on this sheet is number 6. That talks about the storm drain. And as I understand, Ben, there's not an HOA, is that correct? Will not be an HOA, okay. So this question asked, Matt asked the question, who will maintain the storm drain pond basin? Has that been discussed?
Well, it was discussed at a prior meeting. And it was determined at that time, and there might be an HOA if it's decided that we need to maintain that. But before it was stated that that would be a council decision. Our preference would probably be that land to just be given to the city, but where that would be, that was a decision that I guess was determined that would have to happen at the council level. So.
And that's to my understanding, that's correct. In the past, all those storm drain basins, the city has taken them on it, except the case of Mahogany, where it's an HOA. All the others around town, the city has taken those on, maintains those. And so is from my perception, everything's been complete, except that's still a question that sits there. So we could make a recommendation to grant final with the idea that the city council then would review the status of the storm basin.
Thank you and appreciate the background, Jake. Ben, I assume you're representing the project. Do you have anything that you'd like to share prior to us working through this as a commission?
I think we're all familiar with it again. You want me to go into detail, just kind of an overview of it, or again, it's about 11 1/4 acres.
You'll push the green
sorry.
button. There we go.
Yeah, just as a kind of from the 20,000 foot level, it's a 11 1/4 acre piece, zoned R112, just a little better than 1/4 acre lots. The lots, there's 24 lots. They range in size from that 12,000 square feet up to just a little over an acre. Again, concept and kind of a preliminary approval has been granted. We went through and moved it right through construction documents with the city consultant, Matt, and has satisfied all of his concerns. And it's, as far as we're concerned, I think we're all on the same page and it's ready to go. So we've been working with the city power. There's a design in place. There's kind of some options, some other possibilities, but they do have a couple of scenarios there. We've been working with Rocky Mountain Power. We're under contract with them for some work that they have to do. Been through the water company. We're squared away as far as ditches and water shares and if there's other questions, I think that's kind of the broad overview, but I think we worked through it. So
Appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I have one question. There's kind of a dotted line that runs through some of the lots right there. I think it's lot 20, 18, 22, and 4. What is that, a ditch? It's going to be, what is that?
no, over just to the on the west side, you'll see a parcel A on 400 West. That's a city culinary well.
Oh, that's the well, okay.
Yeah, and so that falls, the dotted line shows, it designates a well protection zone 2.
Oh, okay.
And so those lots in that well protection zone 2 are subject to certain conditions that the state water people, and that's another jurisdiction that's reviewed this as far as the state water, but it falls within that well protection zone 2. So you have to comply to certain conditions related to that. As far as fertilizer and, can't put a dry cleaner on there, couldn't put an auto body shop, certain things like that.
So you can tell the basement and things like that. Okay,
Yeah,
all right.
yeah.
I just noticed
It
that.
talks about like keeping your fertilizer in a container and, things like that.
But it's not as restrictive as you can't use fertilizer. It just needs to be.
And whoever
Yeah.
whoever that's designated, whoever buys that lot will be aware of that.
Yeah, well, it's designated on the
That's why it
plat,
has
and you
R
can
by it.
see on So the lots that are within that, like say lot 18R.
Yeah, have an R by them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, and then on the plat, there's a note, note number 4. It says lots noted with an R and drinking water source protection zone, you know, yada, yada, yada.
Yeah, my
So,
copy was so small, I couldn't read that, so.
Yeah, you gotta have some pretty good eyes. But yeah, that note 4 kind of gives a little more detail on that, so. Good question.
Thank you. What else?
You ready for motion, Mr. Chairman?
I'm ready.
Okay. Treat on the agenda, it's got preliminary and final. Ben indicated already received preliminary. Do we need to just grant final or preliminary and final?
Well, again, and I was a little fuzzy on that. I thought the process was concept, preliminary, and final. We've been granted concept, but preliminary, the commission was hesitant to grant preliminary with any conditions. And so we just moved forward and satisfied everything. And so we've kind of moved through preliminary and it's eligible for final.
We can do both.
Yeah,
final.
everything's been met. So we kind of just moved through.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we grant preliminary and final subdivision approval for the Rupp subdivision Far and West Island Road and pass it on to City Council with a positive recommendation with the note that the City Council will work out the storm basin ownership.
Thank you, Commissioner Little. Do we have a second on the motion?
I will second that, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Before we vote, this is an opportunity to discuss anything else related to this particular action. Seeing no discussion, I will go ahead and vote. Please indicate whether you approve of the motion as outlined. Please indicate. That's unanimous. We have granted preliminary and final approval as Commissioner Little outlined in his motion. Thank you. We'll now move to, and thank you, Ben. Appreciate having that stuff buttoned up. We like to send over clean things to the City Council, and it's a lot easier when you come in with all those things tied up. So thank you.
Thank you.
We'll now move to agenda item number 4, which is similar to what we just did, is for preliminary and final approval of a 2-lot subdivision, the Koval subdivision, located near where we just were at 468 West Island Road. If we have, I'm going to let Jake first introduce the some of staff's perspective, and then it looks like we have a representative from the project as well. So we'll get to you second.
Thank you. Tricia, could you pull up the packet item there on that? This is a creation, splitting one lot into 2, located next to the Morgan City property, the power station on Island Road, and also backs up to the Weber River. It is in the floodplain, and so an elevation certificate would be required, but that would come at the building level and would be reviewed by staff. The one item that we had was that if a recommendation is made that a delay agreement be required from the applicant. Currently, there's no curb, gutter, and sidewalk on the street. And so when that is added, that the landowner participate and paying for that along with other landowners in the city.
Is there any structure already on this property?
I don't think so on the new lot, is there?
Not on the new lot.
Okay, so we're subdividing the greater parcel into two lots. Lot one in this visual is what has the existing structure.
Actually, it's the remaining parcel. On recording, staff is more than likely gonna recommend that it says lot 1 and 2 instead of lot 1 as a new one and the remaining parcel. We'll make that change.
Okay, continue, Jake, sorry.
No, that's good. Teresa, were there any other comments from Matt on this one?
I know, just that they have the elevation that it did. This particular lot, already has been stuck in for utilities due to that. And I don't believe this lot within the next few years of when we did do the Island Road resurfacing, and so when they did that, when they fixed that, they put those in already. Only just the elevation certificate also looks good, due to the fact that the city delay agreement on the curb and gutter was recommended instead of requiring the applicant to do so, as there's no sidewalk on the street in that area.
So that's it for us. If the applicant wants.
Please.
So Chad Coble, so we agreed to the delay agreement. We did have our architect, Jared Anderson, reach out to Matt. And Matt had suggested that the elevation certificate doesn't need to be submitted until post-building. And we do understand that with the basement being desired in this lot, we would have an engineer say how low we could go so as to not run into any floodplain issues.
And just to be clear, any floodplain issues aren't necessarily a condition of subdividing the lot necessarily, right? That's just something, it's almost a buyer beware, sort of you should know what you're buying. Or am I missing something? Is there?
Correct. If it were a floodway, that would be different. That's where it's, you can't build in a floodway. So if the minimum lot size requirements or building area was in a floodway, that would change it, but this is floodplain.
Okay. Thank you both for that background. There may be more questions, so keep your mics handy.
And the delay agreement happens at the council level in terms of requirement.
Better them than us. All right, thank you for that. What planning concerns with respect to our administrative responsibility to ensure adherence to the land use ordinances do we have as a commission?
Mr. Chair, my question is just on that delay agreement. I haven't been involved in one before. Do we have those in place with others in a similar situation where there's no existing curb and gutter? Has it worked out okay?
Yeah, so we have, years ago, what we used to do to put money in escrow, as you can obviously see, that would not be beneficial by the time we actually got around to putting that curb and gutter in. So as a practice for most cities, in a situation like this where you're going to be eventually having to redo that road, requiring them to put it in now and then we tear it all up. It's just not beneficial for these delay agreements stay with the land. And so if at any time these lots are sold to someone else, they would be responsible. Whoever owns it at the time that the sidewalks are put in, you'll pay that.
And is there any expectation of cost on what that will be? Is it just open-ended? So if we build it out of like gold or tungsten or something like, but there's really no expectation on what that could cost, right? They're just taking that risk that whatever it is, they're agreeing to do it.
And it would be to city standards. So unless the city standards change, we can't go require above and beyond the city standards as far as curb and gutter. So if we decided to do, we can only do what is allowed in the city standards.
And protecting the customer in this case, is there something that says that it's a comparable market rate for concrete at that particular time, or, how's that worded?
Well, the city's gonna do the entire street at the
Yeah.
same time, so you're getting the group rate in terms of that. And I don't know the details of a delay agreement, but I'm sure it would follow practice that's the city has been doing in the past.
My other question with that, I mean, it is more of a, hey, what can they expect at some future point if they're gonna cost more than the house to do the curb and gutter? What about existing houses that also don't have curb and gutter there, that are neighboring? Are they sharing in that obligation, future obligation, or is it just new builds?
It depends on at the time of build what they actually, some were delay agreements, have some escrow account.
So there's a mix of those just over time, how that's changed. And so some might not participate at all, some would, and, okay.
If this applicant chose not to do a delay agreement, then they're required to do it.
Yeah.
That's just an option to mitigate.
And it's not the street they're building, which is the expensive part. Curb, gutter, and sidewalk. It's not cheap, but it's not the same as the street. And this is, delay agreement is a best practice that a lot of cities are doing. And well, most, of course, new development entirely has it. However, in a case like this, where you bringing in one home on an existing street, that is a best practice that other cities are also doing.
And I could explain that further if you'd like.
Well, I think I'm good there too. The last question would be on that is there any reasonable time expectation on when the city would be planning again for them? Is that in any of the plans?
Mr. Garside, our legal counsel.
Okay.
He's on.
Steve, go ahead.
Right. Thank you. So it's just not a delay agreement. The agreements also generally say that they will not contest the creation of a special improvement district. And so if the city determines that now it's time to go forward, they can create that special improvement district. And those that do not have a delay agreement and do not have the curb and gutter, then may also be required to participate if there's sufficient participation in the special improvement district. So the cost would be shared that way as well. Timing, basically, it will just be at the city's discretion when it would be the most efficient time to do that. And sometimes it could be based more on safety than just efficiency.
Thank you. What other planning concerns do we have as a commission? Good, because if it's for me, then.
Steve, in the documentation, you'll notice just a statement by the ditch owner that says it's okay to cross the ditch, and I'm not sure his title, but it didn't state it. But should that be memorialized and recorded with the land in a form of an agreement, say? I mean, it's okay today, but next week it isn't. We'd want that to continue on.
I mean, obviously that should be a development requirement. I mean, I don't know whether they required, as far as crossing the ditch, if they've also designated what type of piping or whatever needs to be there. Generally, if it's not, I mean, if, again, back gold or tungsten, if they're not asking for gold or tungsten piping, then generally we would ensure that through the development and inspection of the development, that the appropriate piping was placed. And so that, again, that should be a listed requirement by the engineer. And if it's not, then it doesn't necessarily need to be filed against the property, but as long as there's an agreement that that the parties in interest have executed.
Good, thank you.
So just a same kind of question I asked the other project representative, and that is with respect to the engineering recommendations. Are all the open items closed out at this point?
As far as the,
Anything that the city, Matt might have come back and said, this needs to be addressed, this needs to be addressed.
no, I showed him and he said the lot 1, lot 2 would be more appropriate. But beyond that, he didn't have any other hesitations.
Okay. And then just for my novice eye, as I look at the plat, feels like there's a lot going on there with all the other symbols and icons that I don't know if it's because it's by the river, because of the ditch, because of the power plant. But it feels like there's a lot going on there. Is there anything that I'm missing with respect to that's going to, create an unforeseen challenge?
I had my surveyor go overboard because he was worried about red lines. No, it's just showing that the water's already subbed, the sewer's already subbed, and then the elevations, because we knew that they were going to be a question. So he did a lot of elevations along that riverbank too. And then that floodplain that exists in the back corner.
But you'll notice the lines for the floodplain go right through the city power substation. Now that's not correct.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
It's good to be aware of, though.
It's also to be noted, the right side of the property, there's that easement. That's actually the storm drain from the last subdivision that that's on the docket for RUBS.
Okay.
Yeah, that's where it drains out to the river through my property there.
Thank you. See, it's all works together. What other comments or questions are there? Again, the applicant's requesting preliminary and final approval for the subdivision that we would then move on to the city council. Anything final before we make some type of motion?
It feels like, doesn't feel like you mentioned the word final approval. Are we passing on a preliminary and a final at the same time?
We can, that's what the applicant's requesting.
Okay.
And just for, I don't know if it's semantics or not, but we would be granting preliminary. And then, the final we would be passing on to the city council as well. So that the city council doesn't need the preliminary, they just need the final.
Nice. I can make a recommendation if you'd like, Mr. Chair.
Please do.
Make a recommendation that the project move forward with the conditions and meet the engineering plat requirements. And that the approval should include that delay agreement for the curb, gutter, and sidewalk.
Thank you. You worded that as a recommendation. I'm making sure you're comfortable with that being a formal motion.
Yes.
Thank you. With that motion on the table, is there a second on the motion?
I'll second that.
Any discussion?
And of course, that necessarily includes the granting of preliminary if you're recommending final approval.
Say that again, Steve.
Just saying that would necessarily include the granting of preliminary if you're recommending the approval of final.
And just for, I don't have perfect recall on my memory, did you mention preliminary or just final? Or, if you didn't, someone could proffer a friendly amendment to make sure it covers that. Play back the
So-
recording.
Can I move that we grant preliminary approval and recommend final approval with the condition that a delay agreement is signed for future curb gutter and sidewalk?
So we have, we have two motions that are on the table. I just want to make sure I handle this right.
Yeah,
Steve.
I might have made that messier.
No, it's okay. I just want to make sure we resolve the first one and then entertain the second one. And if that's part of the discussion, then, maybe posing that as a friendly amendment to the existing motion as opposed to an entirely new motion might make it easier.
What would the wording be for that?
Just exactly that. Just, would you accept the friendly amendment?
You got a motion on the floor. You, the chair, can accept the second motion. If you get asked to make a motion, you got any motion, if they accept that wording as a motion.
So there you go. So thank you for walking me through that. I did not take parliamentary procedure.
I would accept that wording, Mr. Chair.
All right, for that motion, okay. And would you still second that?
Yes, I'll still second that.
Okay, so we're back to any other discussion on the motion as amended and originally outlined. Okay, thank you.
Any discussion? Vote.
Not seeing any other comments. Let's go ahead and vote. All in favor of the motion? That's unanimous, Teresa. So thank you very much. And thank you, Covels, for joining us. We have our last agenda item, which is, this one's a preliminary approval only, which means we are not passing anything on to the city council at this point. This is an administrative function that we'll be going through for the Anderton subdivision located at 177 South State. At this time, again, Jake, if you wouldn't mind setting the stage for us with this particular project.
Great, thank you. And Teresa, could you pull up the zoning? Let's look at the zoning first, and then we'll go to comments. Property is located 177 South State in the R18 zone. So it's the creation of two lots behind.
Taking one, dividing the three.
Yeah, taking one lot and dividing it into three, a kind of Utah shape lot turned sideways. With the existing drive that's on the south end of the property, that would be part of the new drive going in, and then would go in, there'd be two lots to the rear of the property. And then where the 177 number is, that would be the front lot for the frontage there. And Teresa, do you mind bringing up Matt's comments? And the applicant, you've seen the comments from the engineer?
No.
Oh, you haven't? Okay,
What's that? He's deaf.
okay. Okay, if you could zoom in. Oh, you have, okay. So these are some of the comments from the engineer. Would you mind zooming in a little bit farther, seeing if we can? Okay, so we still have a number of questions on this application that we feel need to be worked out. These are comments from the engineer. First comment is On the left there, are there any changes to the drive approach to be 16 feet wide? UDOT may need to, I guess, authorize changes or recommend changes. So a question for the applicant, have you talked to UDOT regarding this? Because it is, okay. That would be a recommendation to do that because it is state route. And then also the question, that's a planning question, is the setback treated like a corner lot? Steve or Teresa, do you know that question? I actually don't know that. I'll do a little bit more research. I would guess it is not a corner lot because the drive is not a public street, but
it's going to be, is that going to be a private drive? Is that going to be included on that lot? Or so that, yeah, they can't violate any setbacks. So if basically the driveway still, I mean, that private drive is going to still have to be part of that lot.
And my understanding is that that's the intent, is the driveway is part of that lot, correct?
It will be part and owned by the lots in the rear.
Okay,
That's what you're asking.
yes.
Yes, I think that the driveway itself will be access to the barn area, and the existing home will only go to the edge of the drive.
Okay.
As far as ownership of property.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so next comment there, sewer line serving 2 properties must be owned by the city up to the end of the 8-inch main. Lot 4 must tie into the 8-inch main. And a utility easement is needed. So addition of a utility easement for the sewer. And then if you could move up to the other comments. And these are from the engineer. I did discuss them with him, but he would be the expert on that. Next comment, will this be considered a private lane? Is less than 500 feet? And I think you've answered that already. Comment on the water lateral there on the right in terms of separating those. And then comment the one on the top there. Have you had discussion with the fire marshal or the turnaround?
As far as staff, we did have he's just asking the fire hydrant be to the north. Place there with a blowout valve there. And other than that, he's good with dimensions of the
And on the turnaround, I have a comment there. So lot number 4, my understanding is your intent is to keep the existing shed on the property. And so with that being an accessory structure, it needs to go at the rear of the property. So the north side would be the front. And then according to city ordinance, the required frontage for a drive is 70 feet. So make the recommendation that you make that drive wider so that there's 70 feet from the corner there to meet that requirement.
To be considered a drive, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, a drive and a frontage.
That's what I mean, yeah.
So I don't know what the
How much is
dimension.
it?
Well, there's not a dimension on there exactly, so it is hard to see. I'm guessing it's maybe 30 to 40 feet. So from the corner, if your engineer could just extend it so it's 70. So probably just estimating, 30 feet or whatever that distance is. Does that make sense?
Well, you're suggesting that the frontage is only on the north side
Well, can
So-
I,
Go
I
ahead.
want to say,
In order to maintain the barn where it is by code, it has to be behind the property, which in order to count that drive frontage, if you're going to put the barn behind, it's got to by code be set.
And
So on
then,
a private lane, does that frontage always have to be at 90 degrees to the front of the house? I mean, you're gonna have about 200 feet of frontage if you count the side and front. Coming across there, but on a private lane, is that a problem?
so with keeping the existing structure, you want it at the rear of the lot rather than the side. And so that's where that comes along there.
And I guess that's a question that I have is, there's all kinds of shapes of lots that are curved and diagonal and different things. And we call the frontage, the access point from the road is kind of how we orient it. But in this case, the road kind of covers 2 to 3 sides of the property, depending how you slice and dice this. So what for official purposes, what counts as the front of the property?
I guess that would be my comment also, is you're saying we need more frontage, so we add more asphalt back up into that area. It's not required for fire trucks to turn around. All that does is take away greenery and add asphalt. There's no function to that extended driveway. And in a private situation where you're not working with road frontage on a public road, why add that much extra curvature to your asphalt?
You make a great point there. I do want to bring in Steve here to this conversation. With the existing shed being non-conforming, Steve, would that also maybe apply to this situation?
Sorry.
Oh, I'm just going to put a note here. We'll come back to the road in a second because it relates to this. So the existing shed is 1.3 feet off the property line, according to the drawing. The ordinance, city ordinance is 5 feet from the property line for an accessory structure. My understanding of non-conforming uses, as I reviewed state code today, is that if the structure is in good quality, is stable and being maintained and should not be demolished due to safety hazards, then it can continue according as a non-conforming use of the property. So my question back for Steve for legal, would this then apply in 2 cases with that non-conforming building? The first case being the property line for the existing shed, and then the second case, the frontage requirement according to the ordinance.
Okay, so back to when I was looking at your email last night, I just made the assumption, which obviously is problematic, that we've used the term non-conforming. So was this building lawful from its inception? And do we know that? Because that's the only way that it could be granted non-conforming use. If it was not placed there lawfully, then we've got another issue we need to deal with. The 5 foot. My next question then is the 5 foot setback. Is that rear yard or side yard? Would it be an accessory structure?
Accessory structure in the side yard.
It's the same. 5 for both rear and side.
Okay. All right.
So side, I guess then it would apply there, but continue.
Sure. And then the other issue is, and people are wondering, why is it a big deal to have, designate which side of the lot is front and rear? And part of that is to ensure that you have the proper setbacks with the neighboring homes. And you've seen some situations where it's been problematic on some corner lots when they haven't followed those. And so that's one of the reasons we need to designate those. And so anyway, if have we determined that indeed the shed was lawful from its inception? Did we ever have that short of a setback in these areas?
So that'd be a question for the applicant is when the shed was built, was it legal to build it on, at 1 foot offset?
My question would be, when did the setback become the legal standard?
It's a good question, and we need to establish when that particular ordinance was adopted and what was it before and what year was the shed built to answer that question. But I don't know that we have.
But Jake, if you declare it non-conforming, does that matter?
You got it
I think the house was built in 1972
with the barn.
with the barn, same time.
That doesn't matter if you declare it non-conforming.
Well, but it has to be, I guess, the city could grant that without doing the research, but it is incumbent upon the applicant to, for them to have the evidence to establish that indeed is lawfully non-conforming, as opposed to it's just been there forever because that was where it's built. And it might have been that was, is that property line always been there, or has there been a subdivision of that property as well that created the setback?
There's no separation, it was there.
I think this is something we have to do a little bit of research on, just to look at it. And maybe we ask the applicant if you could just provide some historical records of the property on that. And then in addition, if you could provide some records of the shed's current condition, which is some photos, and then maybe a written statement that it's, of sound quality currently, that it's not going to propose, it's not going to make a hazard, because that's when a city could pull back on a non-conforming building, is, if it was an old barn that was going to fall down or something like that. And so just, providing a statement in terms of the quality or the safety condition of the structure, some proof of that.
So let me see if I understand correctly. That non-conforming could be a justifiable term as long as it was conforming at the time it was built, correct?
Correct.
And that we could determine that by getting records of construction dates, right? My question is, so that we can do our full research, who do we ask to figure out when the setback code was initiated?
We can do that. The city can look up when the code was established. Teresa, you have records?
The barn was built, so we can look at the code at the time the barn was built.
So if you could provide,
Is there a
research as
difference
to when it was built?
between code for agricultural buildings back in those days as versus to residential outbuildings?
Yes.
This was a barn that was built in an agricultural district. This barn and the property was all listed as agricultural up till a few years ago, but then didn't conform because we didn't have 5 acres.
Exactly. And the other thing that's important, and I don't want people to think that we're splitting hairs, is that it's important because the impact on the neighboring parcel. If they eventually decide to develop because of this nonconformity based on the fire code, they will have to, any building they put up is actually going to have to be further away. So it is impinging upon the neighbors. And so we just want to make sure that the respective property rights are appropriately balanced.
Would it solve the problem if our neighbor, the current owner, signed an agreement that he understood that we're non-conforming and he agrees to would be 5, 6, 7 foot setback on any structures he builds in the future?
Well, he'd be required to do that by the code regardless. And so, yeah, he cannot, your neighbor cannot basically approve a non-conformity if it was not legally initiated.
Steve, what happens? So we're trying to establish evidence that it was a legal structure at the time and is currently non-conforming based on current ordinances. What happens if that's not found to be the case? What are the implications for the applicant?
If it's found that it was not created lawfully,
Correct.
well, he'd have a few options. One would be to go to the neighbor and say, hey, can I pick up 5 feet of property, or 3 7/10, whatever the requirement is, on that, and he could do that. I don't have any idea what the structure is like, whether it could be relocated. But if it was not lawful from the beginning, then he has no really property interest in that building. And the city actually would have the authority to ask him to remove the structure.
Can I ask the question of the exact opposite, with the assumption that it was conforming at the time it was built? What implication does that give us with our plan moving forward?
Well, if it indeed is non-conforming and it was legally there from the beginning, then yes, then it can remain as under the conditions that Jake talked about.
Thank you.
And a couple other things. Recommend you talk with the Postal Service and see how you'd want to do a mailbox. And then also question is trash services. That is quite a distance to be hauling them out. And I don't know that there has to be a place for trash cans, but just a question for the applicant if in terms of people taking their trash out. My understanding is that trash would not go in on private. I actually don't. They don't go into private lanes. Okay.
We'd have to move it out. Is that right?
I'm assuming other private lanes have to do the same thing, right? Move it
Yeah.
out to the city road.
Yeah. Okay.
And we maintain our own road as far as plowing and everything else as a private lane.
Yes.
We anticipate that.
Okay.
Just out of curiosity, like, I see that shed because I walk by all the time. It looks like there's some horse stalls in the back. You store a boat in there on occasion, things like that. Like, what is I mean, to me, it would sound like bad news if I had to consider tearing down a shed. But what is it valuable to you guys? Do you guys use that? Is that a valuable piece, or are you like, oh, just blow it up, who cares?
No, we use it quite frequently.
At staff, we don't have any more. We do recommend that these items be reviewed and taken care of before coming back with the preliminary.
Okay, can I ask you another question? Can you have an outbuilding on your side yard? If I have an acre of ground or half acre ground, can I put an outside building on my side yard? It has to be in my backyard, rear yard.
It needs to meet the front setback.
Can I put an outside building on my side yard?
Yeah, yes, on the side yard, but it does need to meet the front setback.
Say it again.
It does need to meet the front setback as well.
And if it does with the curvature of the road, it meets that, then the house could face the west. That building meets this setback to the road.
Correct. That's where we came back to that. The shed, is it a legal non-conforming use or a non-legal non-conforming use?
I understand you need to establish that.
Right.
But even so, if they can have a shed in their side yard, they can still face their house to the west. Because that road up top doesn't mean anything. That's just their side yard again.
Correct.
They face their house to the west.
Yes.
That building's on their side yard. You've been telling me they had to face their house to the north and make their road longer.
That's where everything kind of pivoted around the existing shed discussion.
Okay, and the question is, if that was, and I was around back then, it was built, that house and barn was built by some other folks. It was agricultural zone. At that point, you could build agricultural buildings on property lines. It's done all over the place in this community.
I see it on Young Street.
It's done all over the place in this community. When it's agricultural, it was a horse barn to start with. I used 10 4-H means the house. And he was a forest horse leader, had a horse in that barn. In an agricultural area, that barn was built on a property line in an agricultural zone.
So it sounds like and I've seen that same thing in the backyards and along Young Street with some horse barns back there. So what it sounds like is you'll probably be able to find some, if you can find the right information, there'll probably be some that property designation with that kind of thing back in the day, and you'll probably be fine. You just got to find that.
So here's,
Just got to get that, right?
Here's a couple of thoughts this is the second time, at least that I've been here, that you as an applicant have come before us, and it feels like, on one hand, you own this piece of America, it's yours, you want to subdivide your property, and for the most part, it's a good plan. There's just a few of these rules that seem to get in the way. And so how do we work within these rules so that you can accomplish what you want to do? Because that, and our role as a commission is to kind of be a steward of those rules. So those rules are in place. We're here to help and, understand. So we want to make sure you as an applicant have what you need to move forward with your project. And so the staff has created some, with engineering, you see some of these engineering notes, there's some options, and it feels like the bigger sticking point for me isn't the setback off the property lines. I think you'll probably be able to demonstrate the right evidence for that. It's this front setback issue. So yes, even if you face the house to the west, so it's on the side yard, it's still not set back from the front somehow because of what we designate as the front, depending on where, the front of the property is listed in the actual plat.
The front yard setback for accessory structure is 25 feet.
It also states in the note right below that the minimum side yard setback for accessory structure on the 5 feet. It is, the structure is located at least 10 feet behind the principal structure. So that's where there's the problem.
So I mean, within those constraints, and those are the constraints, is there a different way to access this and subdivide those, this piece into 3 pieces that can accommodate that in a different, creative way? I don't know. I'd have to, kind of pencil that out. But as you've looked at, are there other options you've considered?
Well, Chairman, can I ask another question that I just thought of as Commissioner Little mentioned that is it true that agricultural buildings in agricultural zones can be to the property line or used to?
Have to look that, read that.
Oh, I thought you were saying that was the
I
case.
know there's a lot of them around that were done that way back in the day.
So that's
Whether it
just
was
something we
legal-
need to
whether it was legal
research
or
and
not,
see.
Or whether there's no inspector. Back then, there was no inspector, so people just did it. I don't know the actual answer if it was legal in an agricultural zone.
Okay.
Actually, there's a lot of them in the community that were built on the property line back in the day. Where that was process, whether that was just normal process, or that was code, I don't know. You'd have to look that up and see. And that would be what it was then. The current code, the current code's 5. That doesn't indicate what the code may have been when it was built.
So we don't have the right to assume that the house was built legally back in 72. So therefore, we've been paying taxes on an illegal building that the city may tear down. Does that mean they will reimburse us for the taxes for the last 25 years? And then we can tear it down free.
I like the way you think.
What's that?
The taxes should be doubled.
Yeah.
So let's kind of see if we can, organize our thoughts here a little bit. That this is not a final approval. This is a preliminary approval, and as you've seen from the other projects before you, a lot of those and all of the engineering components were ironed out as they came before us for final. And that's kind of the same expectation we'd have for you. So there's clearly some things to work out between now and then. And my question, if we were to grant preliminary approval, I'd want to have a pretty good understanding of, you know, what this is ultimately going to look like. And to me, there's still open questions. There's open questions because of those setback concerns and whether that's you know, at the time of being built was a legal use and now it's designated as non-conforming. I think once we understand that and we can see how this pencils out as an actual design, you know, because we're supposed to be approving the design of the site and, you know, the site plan and how that, you know, the land use fits within the code. And I can't see that. I can't make a determination right now because I don't have enough information.
Well, can I ask you a question? Because this has been coming up a couple different times in the 2 times we've been here. I don't think there's going to be any problem that we can show that the barn was built at a time when the code was allowing for that. So with that assumption, as we work that out, I'm still confused at how the determination of what's front property, side property, when you've got a curving road to determine, because I can tell you what I think of what's set back, and you might say, well, that's not the front of the property. I just want to know what the definition of front is.
Yeah, and it's a great question. Would you mind, you know, going up to the board and you can actually write on that with
Actually, I think it's broken.
as a never mind, someone didn't pay their property taxes. Would you mind just pointing them
Doing what?
to the boundary of that property that includes the shed? Once it's subdivided, what's the actual boundary
Oh, the property that includes the shed.
that includes the shed? This one, you know, is it that line there in the middle of the road or what are we looking at?
Yeah, it's, it'll share this road right here,
Okay,
and then it'll come up right.
okay, so that line, that lane that comes out on the private lane, you know, that it kind of has not a hammerhead, but there's, I thought that was stubbing out to one property and then stubbing out to the next property.
What do you mean, like right here?
No, so, do we have a little pointer thing?
Where the road is.
Yeah, I'm talking about the road.
This is the property line and then it curves and goes straight there.
Yes, so what's weird to me is that that road that's coming back, is that servicing both properties then? And then what's the stub to the north or east or whatever that is?
That's the hammerhead for the fire truck. Dave.
Okay, so that's just the turnaround for the fire, okay.
The concept, if you remember, was originally that Anderson's brought in here was a road that came here with a turnaround right here. And it was anticipated this would be the frontage to take care of this shed being in the back setback. And then this is a new application for preliminary that doesn't have the hammerhead, excuse me, cul-de-sac anymore, and they're doing a hammerhead. And now where is it that the applicant is showing the frontage?
Okay, so just again, for my own education here, we're creating out of this one parcel, parcels 1, 3, and 4. 2 is already separate, right? Is that accurate? And if we zoom out or zoom back, yeah, there we go. So 2 is already its own thing. We're talking about 1, 3, and 4. And the access to 3 and 4 is not off of that turnaround hammerhead part. It's off of the first one. So to me, it's the creativity and drawing out. Like I'm not picturing the setbacks, you know, side, front, you know, if it's front, you need to be set back 25 feet. If it's side, it's set back X feet. As you know, I don't have them all memorized, but that might give you some more creativity if depending on how you orient the plot. So I'm not picturing what that's going to look like. I'm having a hard time seeing, you know, that orientation.
So do you want him to show where the house is oriented?
Well, just, I mean, in case it matters, then, I mean, if we're having this as the frontage, then this would obviously be behind.
Right.
And as long as we can show that the non-conforming, the legal, then that would be okay.
Then you're good to go. Yeah.
This property line from here to here, if this is considered the frontage, is 25 feet or more.
So if it's the
But the problem is you have to be behind the, 10 feet behind the primary structure. So where are you gonna put the house?
So the rule is 10 feet behind the primary structure and 25 feet off the property line, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, in notes here, this is what is the concern that says right here. It says the accessory structure is located at least 10 feet behind the primary structure.
Well, the only way that would work then is this, consider this frontage. There's no way I can have primary structure 10 feet in front of that.
Yeah.
You're saying you've got the frontage, right? Doesn't matter which way you face your house.
So go ahead and say that into the microphone.
Well, we're just having I guess we're having a thought here for a sec, but let's just hypothetically jump to lot 3. Okay. The frontage for lot 3 is the lot from where the road is running all the way to the north end of the property. Even though there's not a road there, that's the frontage of that property, correct? From this road here, so sorry.
So what it's asking is frontage considered the width of the lot, not just the length of the road, rather the width of the lot. Any other subdivision in town, the width of the lot, the frontage is just the length of the width of the lot. So the question is,
The frontage on lot 3. Can we talk about that for a second?
is it just the length of the road or the whole width of the lot?
No.
For me?
Yeah. Yeah. It's for somebody that can give me a solid answer.
Yeah, I'm gonna ask, again, I don't know the city code that well, being relatively new. Steve or Teresa, do you know the frontage? Is it
The width of the lot.
the width of the lot, or does it require road frontage?
Yeah, no, the frontage is defined as facing a roadway, whether it's a private or a public roadway.
And if the roadway curves, then how do you calculate the frontage?
Well, the code provides for that. I mean, some are considered to be gore-shaped lots and so they'll look at that and there's some calculations in the code.
One question, Steve, if it's just stubbing in to a lot, like in the case of lot 3, how would that factor in? Where these are not necessarily considered flag lots, but are like flag lots where you're just stubbing in. How does that frontage requirement deal with that?
With the private lane, if the terminus is at your lot, like a driveway, so like a flag lot, right? Then you have the opportunity to designate which is going to be your front yard. That makes sense?
So in this case, in lot 3, is the frontage of this lot the west side of the property, or is it the inside of the curve of that road?
No, again, they could now, and that would be my next question. I mean, are those just hammerhead turnarounds or are they stub roads that are going to continue in the future?
Hammerhead turnaround.
Hammerhead turnaround.
Okay.
In this example.
Okay, so then that one would be treated like a flag lot, and they would be able to have their option of whether they go north or south. I mean, sorry, west or south.
So
Face any direction they want.
And I guess that's the question. So outside of these restrictions that you're hearing and they're confusing, if you had your own preference without any of that, how would the houses be oriented on these lots?
I don't know, I'm gonna say.
Originally, you had some thought in mind. So
Well, I did. It would actually face this way.
Yeah.
Right where that curve is.
face into the curve. Both properties face into the curve.
No, that one I think would actually be facing south.
Okay.
And this one would be facing kind of.
So you can't see where he's pointing, Steve, but on lot 4, he's talking about having the home face the center of that curve. And on lot 3, the home potentially facing basically south. that being said, with your comment about the flag lot, is this a moot point? In other words, it's okay, you can orient it either way and be just fine.
Yeah, and like, like we've talked about, there's just a lot of different issues we've still got to work with on this. And so as we work through the code, once we've figured out what they're coming in compliance with, it looks to me at initial blush, and I hate to give these kind of opinions when we're still, because, someone eventually will hold you to it, that it does look like we could orient the way that they want to. But again, we've got to do the measurements, and with the road curving and your front yard setback different on the shed, where it's got to be further back than the primary structure. We've got a lot of issues we've got to work through on this one.
And I just want to bring up, this is an unusual plat and subdivision of property, with it being, behind, it's not following subdivisions like we normally see. So it does require, looking at the code in a different way than is typically done.
The leniency on the coding, I think, is what you're saying, right?
I'm saying we've got to figure out how it works and conforms with this.
I mean, the reality is, as it feels like a project that there's still a lot to figure out, but the good news is it feels like it can be figured out. And I don't, feel like this is a dead in the water kind of thing. I think we just need to understand it a little bit more when it comes to leniency. It's, unfortunately, we have to, or fortunately, we have a code that we have to enforce. And so how can we work within that so you can accomplish what you want? I'm not sure where to go from here as far as a preliminary goes. Do we, as a commission, I mean, it still feels like it's a good project with a number of questions that need to be answered for us to understand. If we subdivide this out and approve this, for this ultimately to look like this, then is it going to create, ultimately the next step when someone comes in with a building permit that now it's unbuildable? We just don't want to create that type of situation.
Well, to that point, what's a little frustrating is there's things that I need to research and find out and bring back to you. But to me, there's still unanswered questions when I bring it back of like, oh, well, that doesn't work because we haven't figured this out yet. What I want to hear is have be told, if you meet this and this and this criteria, we can approve it because that meets the code. And I'm still hearing that I'm not sure what is considered frontage, and if I put my house this way, face this way, then that's okay. I mean, I want to be able to tell you, I want my house right there, and I'll figure out when the barn was built, and you tell me, yeah, you figure that out, and you can build it.
And for me, that's actually helpful to see, if I'm looking at a site plan, I want to see the site plan, not with the structure position.
I can tell you right now, there'd be a driveway right here, circular, so the driveway comes off both sides.
Okay.
And then the house is going to be a kind of a 45-degree kind of half set with the barn here. And then a 45 degrees, so the front door faces this way. Can you follow what I'm saying?
Mhm.
And then another section of the house. So we're gonna, yeah, like a wing, honestly.
The technical speak.
Yeah, with the circular drive this way. So did that give you more information?
I mean, it's helpful. I can visualize what you're wanting to do. The question is, and this is for the commission, is that enough to move forward with preliminary and then button up all of these open questions prior to final? Or is there anything else that collectively we're looking for before granting preliminary?
Shouldn't your engineer, the Great Basin engineering, familiar with what comes? And then if he isn't, we can provide him, and he looks at it and says, yeah, this needs to be changed or that.
Well, I would have thought, and then I saw all these notes. So I wonder if he doesn't have that information.
It is pretty typical for the city engineer and an applicant engineer to go back and forth. That does happen on almost every project as you've seen.
Maybe that discussion should be there rather than here. Get some of those out of the way, because like you say, that's a frustration. I know you said that last meeting too. It's frustrating, just like you're saying, coming on. The code is the code, and the engineer is generally expected to understand.
Mr. Reese, I think you were going to make a comment.
Well, I agree. We owe it to them to give them where to go next on this. If it's an engineering question and we got to determine if it's side yard or backyard or front yard, let's be specific and say this is what they need to, who they need to go to and what they need to find out, because those setbacks are different for those things. So based on what he's told us, where do they need to go to make that determination? Who's the final authority on what constitutes side yard, backyard, front yard there?
The code dictates that. And I think that's where the applicant and your engineer telling us which ones you want to be front and side. You could even just write that on. And then, let me back up. That would go on the next update of your drawing, saying which is front, which is side. And so that would be an additional condition that would help. And then along with that is the establishment of the existing shed being a legal non-conforming use. And then the other comments mentioned.
Teresa.
Mr. Chair, and maybe Jake can just clarify on the next time you can actually, maybe we recommend that the applicant put a footprint of where, not the house, drawing, the footprint of what the house is going to be.
Yeah, they call that a building envelope.
The building envelope on there,
Based on.
which shows setbacks that are being met for side and front, and that way it's, you can see what they're trying to accomplish.
And I think that would, so as far as what Justin was saying, is the next step is making sure the engineer has the right information for the ordinances, so the engineer can work with city staff to determine all the different setbacks, based on, is this considered flag lot, is this considered traditional subdivision, all those kinds of things that change. And then if I'm understanding the term building envelope, basically, within the plat, also kind of, penciling in, here's where you could potentially put a structure, around the perimeter, the setback here, here it is where, and regardless of how you orient.
So would it be helpful, because it seems like this would be the most efficient way to do this, is if we have a private meeting with the city engineer, with our engineer and us, and say, look, this is where I'm gonna put my house. That angle right there is my frontage, because it seems still ambiguous of where frontage is. It's at an angle compared to everything else. And if he says, yes, that'll work, then we can come to you. And as long as we get a sign off from the city engineer that that's fine, then rubber stamp kind of thing.
To me, that feels like a good next move.
Okay.
Mr. Little.
Question from Jake and Teresa. The lot orientation, is that an engineering question or a planning question? If it's a planning question, that needs to be worked out with Jake, Teresa, and possibly Steve as far as setbacks and orientation of home. Is that a planning question or an engineering question?
It is a planning question because it does need to be,
So,
it's something that we need to look at, and in a situation where a lot is
So-
facing the street, it's obvious.
so my direction would be, Mr. Chairman, that the applicant work with Teresa and Jake, possibly Steve, to determine orientation of the building, determination of the existing shed and orientation of the building, front lot, side yard, and setbacks. That can be determined by Teresa and Jake and possibly Steve. That's a planning question, not an engineering question. After that question been solved, then you meet with the engineers jointly and solve any other engineering questions. That'd be my recommendation, Mr. Chairman.
And then Mayor, can I add to that? Just one other thing, I think I think the Rupp subdivision was a great example. Right here, these red things, these comments, can you go back to the Rupp packet? To the memorandum that's provided by their engineer? What I would be trying to do to minimize my brain damage if I were the Andertons, I would be creating this memo right there. And I would put all those red comments in there and anything else that came up that anybody else can think of. And I would do just like this. And I would want to solve those things. And I would always hope the list never grows. And as soon as the list quits growing and it's complete, it's approved. That would be what I would do. I'd create that document with whatever that is. And
That list is from our engineer. They don't create, our engineer does. They check our engineering documents.
J. Jones Associates. Is that ours? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Wherever that came from. That would be,
That's a good
that would be the
concept.
roadmap I'd be working off of.
Um,
That got him across the line.
So we're at this point, we've spent, a fair amount of time discussing this. I think it's a good designation to think about. Is this a planning concern or an engineering concern, and what order those go in? And so I agree with Commissioner Little's recommendation, taking it in that order, first working with staff, Teresa and Jake on the orientation, and then with that orientation, what the setbacks are, and then taking that from there to the engineers. I think that's a valid recommendation. Nonetheless, the action that's been proposed for tonight and put on the agenda is the applicant requesting preliminary approval. And so as a commission, do we want to grant this or deny this, based on this information, what you want to see for next steps? But I think we have enough background on where we're at with this to take action one way or another. And I just ask the commission to kind of voice any other concerns that you have. And if not, then let's move forward one way or another. Yeah, we could also table, absolutely.
What's the standard for preliminary approval? Is there a certain?
I'm gonna defer a little bit on that one. Steve, I don't know if you have a general guideline you like as far as, here's concept and here's the rough pieces that should be done at concept. Here's preliminary and this is what, versus final.
Sure. Just, simply based on first needing to find out the history of the structure, I'd recommend that this be tabled. That's gonna dictate a lot of the issues on how we go forward. So I'd recommend that because of that issue, that it's not ready for preliminary.
Okay. Meanwhile, I would actually love if we could get some of those. That's a great question. Thank you. If we could get maybe a little bit of either training and or a brief synopsis of what that hurdle is for each of those levels, concept, preliminary, and final.
The requirements are specified right in the code that they can go through. It's a lengthy checklist of what needs to be included on the on the submittal.
Thank you for that. We can turn to our textbook and get that answer. All right, so are we ready to do something?
I move that we table this.
Okay. Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Any further discussion? All right, all in favor of the motion to table? Looks unanimous, Teresa. So that does continue this, contingent on, I shouldn't say contingent, I don't want to change anything in what was said. We need the information where it's tabled until we get that information of the year of the structure, when it was built, how that was conforming or non-conforming at the time and all of those kinds of things. So thank you for that. Is there any final questions for anyone in the audience or applicants?
We talked in our meeting prior to this about continuing on having our work session on the master plan. You didn't set that yet. I don't know if you want to set that meeting now. So everybody's aware of when that next discussion might be, time frame for that next meeting, how long you want it to be.
Yeah, and I mentioned too, I can't remember prior to this meeting that I'm more interested in getting it done right than forcing it through. On the other hand, I don't want to intentionally delay things either. So I think we should make progress each month. That's my opinion on the general plan. Does that mean we do a 2-hour work session until it's done? I don't know. There's a lot to discuss. You know, we went through very little in 2 hours tonight. Mayor.
I think that we have the assumption that we're up against the timeline. From that timeline, we can create that by our discussions, finally get happy with it. That's the time to move on. But to hurry ourselves along, it just seems like that creates a panic. We got to have this done by August. We got to have it done. You know, who cares if it goes into 2023? If it's right for the city for the future 20 years. That's my thoughts, is we don't, you know, we probably should build into each meeting one of those sections and go through and do it so that we don't get overloaded. Because it's easy to get overloaded with so many.
And I think we ran into that tonight where
We did.
we tried to eat the whole elephant.
But it was great. It taught us. It taught us you can't eat an elephant in one setting.
What I'd like to do, if we could, I'd like to plan this out a little bit more thoughtfully, and I don't want to do that just on the cuff right this second. But what I'd like is for Teresa to maybe set up some time where I come into the office and meet with, you know, you and Jake and whoever, and let's kind of outline how we want to approach working through that as a commission, because it involves, you know, tonight we had all the city council or most of them here too. So it's bigger than just the commission. If we can do that, Teresa, that I'd prefer that rather than trying to just come up with something right this second.
That'd be great. We'll sit down, do an outline.
You want to set a time frame? Once you get that, then you set that out to us. But you need to let us know what time you want to have that meeting next.
Yeah. Don't know. I would recommend, you know, the next meeting, but I don't know. I would say, you know, 6 o'clock as a default, as a working session, you know, where we haven't done working sessions historically, or at least recently till now. That'd be my recommendation, but what does everyone else think?
I like that. I like the idea. I know nobody wants to go longer, but I feel like tonight we had a lot of agenda items and we talked about a lot of things. And I think if you did even a little before and a little after, that might work. I know everybody wants to go home after this, but it's not always this heavy, right? It's not this.
Just limit on 5 agenda items and a 2-hour work session. But to that point, I think we plan on doing this in June and at a minimum be the work session starting at 6. And if that changes because we decide to incorporate it in the general session or we have a longer work session, we'll communicate that. But I think let's plan on, you know, June's meeting for sure.
And maybe the other thing is no skipped meetings. If we don't have an agenda item, then let's not use that as a reason not to have a meeting. We've got other things to accomplish.
I like it. Does that satisfy what you're asking? I know you're driving home.
Yeah, that's great. The other thing I would add, tonight I came with questions. As the next piece, I would try and come back with answers rather than questions, or try and come up with proposals. So depending on what the schedule you put together, get the schedule out. And from my perspective, you need to come back with answers and suggestions, proposals for that agenda, for that section you're talking about, rather than just questions of why, what it would do. Let's come back with our proposed answers.
Any other?
Mr. Chair, I apologize for speaking. The mayor doesn't speak with the planning commission, but it's a unique situation where we came together with the city council with the thought in mind that we want to get this plan right.
Yeah.
And so that's why I appreciate you listening to me. Appreciate what everybody's thinking about and trying to do the best thing. So just wanted to apologize that it was a special occasion. And I'm really easy at keeping quiet, but this was just unique.
Thank you. Well, that's the thing. That was kind of nice.
It is typical to have joint work sessions. So I think you were
That was my first.
in line.
All right, well, it has been a long night. Is there any final?
The only thing I want to say, Mr. Chair, is just that, just let you know, when the general plan was how they created is by, participation from census, study group, et cetera, et cetera. So it's really hard when you're trying to do a general plan after, and it's only done by whoever participates. So we hope that we get a broad, but we didn't have a lot of participation. Even though they reached out to quite a few people. So the information I got and some of our study groups and staff to help. We knew that it was modify what was presented from census and surveys and study groups.
And if I may, I mentioned the distinction between legislative and administrative, and a lot of what we do and most of the work tonight was administrative during our general session. This is an opportunity to take some of that and influence the legislative side of it, which is an important part of the role as well. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for that. Meeting adjourned.